has come in here to dwell.
A battle in the heart of Alabama caught our attention. Coal miners in one community, they've been on strike now for months.
Working as long as 12 hours a day, 7 days a week, in some of the most dangerous conditions.
I really think that the labor movement is the single greatest force for democracy in the history of the United States.
The story of Alabama is a story of not just resilience, but of militancy.
I say no contract, you say no code. No contract, no contract.
If we ain't all free, ain't none of us free.
You're listening to Alabama's only union talk radio show, The Valley Labor Report, with Adam Keller and Jacob Morrison.
That's right, folks. From the mountains of Kentucky to the bayous of Louisiana, broadcasting online and on the radio from the heart of the Tennessee Valley, the Spice Radio Studio in Huntsville, Alabama. This is the Valley Labor Report. My name is Jacob Morrison, here with my co-host and fellow agitator Adam Keller. Today, UAW Region Director Brandon Mancilla joins to talk about why his union is leading the calls for a ceasefire in Gaza. We also talk to you about how Democrats in the federal government are trying to protect workers from asbestos, while Republicans in the state government are trying to make it easier for employers to expose you to asbestos and get away with it. Not an exaggeration. We're also going to be talking about how Republicans in Montgomery are trying to restrict access to unionization in the state. All that and more on today's program. If you want to be part of the program, we've got a phone number, and let's open the lines up. The phone number is 844-899-TVLR. That is 844-899-8857. You can also leave a voicemail throughout the week, and we might answer it on the next program. If you haven't gotten enough of us by the time that we wrap up here on the radio, or if you just want to see what we're up to throughout the week, you can find us anywhere you find anything online, in particular on our website, TVLR.fm, where you can subscribe to our newsletters. Who gets newsletters Last Week in Southern Labor and Boss Watch? You can get those segments that we do every week on the show in your inbox every single week, where you get to, and you too can see what workers and bosses are up to every single week. You can also find us on Facebook, YouTube, TikTok, wherever you get your podcasts, all at the Valley Labor Report. Just a reminder, your support helps us stay on the air. Our largest single source of funding comes directly from our listeners. So if you want to make a one-time or recurring monthly donation, you can go to tvlr.fm/donate to do that. You can also pre-order our logo cap. Take a look at this. Take a look at this, folks. This is a nice, classic black dad cap, right? This is the kind of hat that everybody needs in their wardrobe. You always got to have just a classic black cap. This one has the TVLR logo on it. It's got a union bug on it because it is union made in the USA. You can pre-order it now. You'll get it in mid to late April. tvlr.fm/store. It is $35 plus shipping if you are local, and if you're local to Huntsville or the greater Huntsville area, Athens, Decatur, places like this, or I mean really just anywhere in Alabama, and you're willing to wait for it right now. If you're in Birmingham and you order the local pickup, then you may have to wait a while till we run into each other, right? But if you're willing to wait and you're somewhere where you believe you will run into one of us at some point, then you can just order the local pickup and you don't have to pay shipping. There you go. Isn't that nice? You save like $7 or $8. So $35 plus shipping, tvlr.fm/store to pre-order our logo cap. You can also get a couple of shirts that we have left over at the same place. You can also become a patron at patreon.com/the Valley Labor Report. And if you're a member of a union, then think about getting your local or international or state the states federation, whatever you've got, think about getting it to sponsor the show, because while the single largest source of funding does come from our listeners, the majority of funding does come from union sponsors. So we could not do it without our union sponsors. So think about doing that if you are in a position to do so.
That's right, folks. And let me add a disclaimer that any viewpoints or opinions expressed in this program belong solely to their author and do not necessarily represent any organization or sponsor. We welcome all of our listeners, whether you are on YouTube, Facebook, Unclaimed Mysteries Internet Radio, WVNN, WZZA, WHIV, WMMT, or through your favorite podcast app. We are proud to be part of the Labor Radio Podcast Network and encourage our listeners to check that out. If you want to hear more content like this, if you want to hear more working class media, check out the Labor Radio Podcast Network. And as most of you know, if you're a longtime listener, we are, of course, not media professionals, just a couple diehard union members. And we believe that Alabama and the South's labor movement and working class deserve a much bigger platform. So we're hoping this project can make a difference on that front. We can't do it without you. I want to thank everyone for tuning in, whether you are one of those loyal fans or if you're a first-time listener. We appreciate you spending some time with us this morning.
Let's jump right into what workers in the U.S. South and American colonies were up to from March the 15th to the 22nd. In new union campaigns, 3 workers at Midwest Air Traffic Control Service in Ashland, Missouri, filed a petition to hold a union election with the National Air Traffic Controllers Association, NATCA. 10 workers at Irving Materials in Somerset, Kentucky, filed a petition to hold a union election with the Teamsters Local 89. 17 workers at Starbucks in Springfield, Virginia, filed a petition to hold a union election with Starbucks Workers United. 5 workers at Wells Fargo in Bradenton, Florida, filed a petition to hold a union election with Wells Fargo's Workers United. 1330 workers at Berea College, which is a work college where you pay no tuition in exchange for working at the college in Berea, Kentucky, filed a petition to hold a union election with the Communication Workers of America. 82 workers at Transdev Services in Houston, Texas, filed a petition to hold a union election with the Teamsters Local 988. In campaign updates, after only 100 days, 4,300 workers at Volkswagen in Chattanooga, Tennessee, filed a petition to hold a union election with the United Auto Workers after hitting a supermajority support for the union inside of the plant. In a first for a president, as far as I can tell, Biden congratulated workers at Volkswagen in Tennessee for filing the petition to hold that union election. Ballots in a union election at a St. Louis cannabis site will be counted, the NLRB announced, after the regional director rejected arguments from the employer that these workers were agricultural in nature and therefore not subject to the National Labor Relations Act, though a date for the counting of the ballots has not been set yet. In election results, 400 workers at the United Football League in Arlington, Texas, withdrew their petition for a union election with the United Steelworkers, USW Local 9004, as did 160 workers at L'Herbage Casino Hotel in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. They withdrew their petition for a union election with the UAW. 226 workers at Ascension Seton Medical Center in Austin, Texas, voted in favor of unionization 120 to 5 with National Nurses United. 51 workers at SP Plus Corporation in St. Rose, Louisiana, voted in favor of unionization 39 to 12 with the Amalgamated Transit Union, ATU, Division 1535. 2 workers at TV Oil and Gas in Winfield, West Virginia, voted against unionization with the USW unanimously, 0 to 2. In settlements, grievances, and unfair labor practices, Paragon Security Systems, located in Clarksburg, West Virginia, is paying out nearly $300,000 to its employees as the result of the settlement of an unfair labor practice charge. The charge alleged that the company refused to bargain in good faith and then subsequently lost their contract with the government to another company that had no accusations of violating labor law. Thus, to make the employees whole for the law-breaking of the company and the results of that lawbreaking, the company is compensating them for all lost wages, benefits, and all direct or foreseeable financial harms, again to the tune of $300,000. NLRB Region 9 director filed a complaint alleging that Trader Joe's threatened employees in Louisville, Kentucky with loss of pay raises and flexibility if they voted for union representation, and interrogated employees about union support. NLRB Region 10 director filed a complaint alleging that Walmart in South Carolina issued, quote, warnings and sent an employee home for engaging in concerted activities with other employees for the purposes of mutual aid and protection, and failed and refused to move, quote, occurrences, which are attendance points, from an employee's personnel file because the employees filed board charges, among other things. In strikes and bargaining updates, newly organized administrative and specialist workers at the UPS Louisville Centennial Hub, LCH, unanimously ratified an addendum agreement on Sunday to classify their jobs under the UPS Teamsters National Master Agreement, propelling forward a national campaign to organize up to 5,000 administrative and specialist employees at other UPS facilities nationwide. Teamsters Local 688 at Gray Bar in St. Louis, Missouri are still on strike, as are Teamsters at Molson Coors. They are still calling for a boycott of the brand. In politics and legislation, Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton is trying to shut down the Annunciation House, a faith-based nonprofit that has been a transitional housing charity for almost 50 years for migrants crossing into the U.S. through El Paso. But he loves religious freedom. National Nurses United, among others, has condemned the attacks. Senator Sherrod Brown reintroduced the VA Employees Fairness Act, which would expand collective bargaining rights to some currently restricted nurses and other clinical professionals at the VA. The United Steelworkers endorsed President Biden's re-election bid. The endorsement comes less than a week after Biden came out in opposition to the purchase of U.S. steel by Nippon. Nicole Berner, former general counsel for the Service Employees International Union, has been confirmed to a lifetime appointment on the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals the same week that a nominee with corporate ties was denied their appointment in what some are calling a sea change. The EPA last week announced a rule that would loosen regulations on gas cars with support from the UAW, with the union saying that the new standards are, quote, more feasible, while reiterating that they support a transition to renewable energy, but emphasizing that the transition to cleaner technologies cannot be used to intensify the global race to the bottom through offshoring and low wages. $8.5 billion will be given to Intel as part of the CHIPS Act, a recent announcement revealed last week, and the Biden administration has said they, quote, expect Intel to respect the rights of their workers to organize. CWA, in a statement, said, high expectations, however, are not enough. Working people deserve guarantees that public funds will support family-supporting jobs, not just boost corporate profits. They are arguing for Intel to sign a binding labor peace agreement. There's a lot of bad news coming out of Florida, especially with respect to their anti-union law passed last year. We spoke to Florida reporter McKenna Schuler about this extensively last week, but the news is not all bad, with some local unions reporting members being spurred to support their union in greater numbers than ever before, including CWA Local 3122 members at the Florida Keys Aqueduct Authority. The fiscal year 24 minibus was released and passed late last night, and the American Federation of Government Employees took issue in particular with parts of the funding bill that seek to curtail telework usage. Alabama State Senator Arthur Orr has introduced a bill that would prohibit state subsidies from being given to employers who voluntarily recognize their workers' union. The bill has passed into law in Tennessee and just last week was signed into law in Georgia, but is almost certainly illegitimate because it preempts the National Labor Relations Act and will certainly be challenged based on those grounds. Alabama State Senator Troy Stubbs introduced a bill that would make it more difficult for workers to win workers' compensation cases regarding asbestos. Meanwhile, the EPA nationwide has finally issued a rule to complete the ban on asbestos production. The AFL-CIO applauded the EPA's move. Louisiana is following the trend of anti-worker legislation in southern Republican states, with a slew of anti-worker laws being proposed this year now that they have achieved a Republican trifecta that had long been warded off by Democratic Governor John Bel Edwards. Laws that would outlaw collective bargaining, loosen child labor laws, make it more difficult for workers to access workers' comp benefits, and more are on the table. After bad faith negotiations with a community coalition around a community benefits agreement for a new stadium for the Kansas City Royals, the community coalition has backed out of negotiations due to the lack of progress and is encouraging their members and others in the community to vote against giving the Royals the requested $1.7 billion in taxpayer subsidies for the stadium. United Campus Workers, CWA, are pushing for a living wage at Jacksonville State University in Alabama and are asking allies to sign a petition to support their fight. Republican Virginia Governor Youngkin vetoed a bill to mandate a minimum of two-person crews for trains going through the state, based in part due ostensibly to competitive concerns with the trucking industry. As Railroad Workers United put it in their newsletter, the idea that 440 truckloads being transported by a single train with a minimum of two-person crews instead of one would somehow make railroads less competitive with trucking doesn't wash. In Internal Union Affairs, analyzing new data from the Federal Reserve on people's personal finances in 2022, the Center for American Progress concluded that union members on average are $100,000 more wealthy than non-union members. The United Auto Workers met with a delegation of Mexican labor leaders representing independent unions from the auto industry to strengthen ties between the unions across the border. That's going to be it. We are going to take a break and be right back with Brandon Mancilla, UAW Region 9A Director, about the UAW's call for a ceasefire in Gaza. Stay tuned. Benefit Architects has proudly supported union members and union-made products for over 35 years. If you are a federal employee and an AFGE member, you're eligible for hundreds of dollars in money-saving benefits, including group life insurance, dental insurance, and AFLAC insurance. Additionally, if you're a union member but don't work for the federal government, you can still qualify for several of these money-saving policies. So give Tate Hure a call at 256-215-6769 for details and to enroll. Again, that is Tate Hure at 256-215-6769.
In Alabama, more than 200,000 of our friends and family members are living without health care coverage. Often folks can't stay healthy enough even to keep their jobs. We can fix this. It's time for us to find a way to close the health care coverage gap so that people can remain at work. Let's make this a priority. Let's close this gap and cover Alabama. To learn more and how you can help, visit coveralabama.org.
The attorneys at Maples, Tucker & Jacobs have stood with the working people of Alabama for over 40 years, providing skilled legal representation for your workplace injury claims. When you are injured on the job, it can be a scary time. The attorneys at Maples, Tucker & Jacobs have the experience to guide you through the process to make sure that you and your family are properly taken care of and your rights are protected. If you need help, call the attorneys at Maples, Tucker & Jacobs at 617-9333 or visit online at www.mtnj.com. No representation is made that the quality of legal services provided is greater than the quality of legal services provided by other law firms.
Support for the Valley Labor Report comes from the International Federation of Professional and Technical Engineers Union. Learn more by visiting www.ifpte.org.
Attention union members, membership organizations, podcasters, or anyone with a payment processing need. The future is here, and your organization needs to be prepared by working with Unionly. With Unionly, your union or organization can take payments on a mobile device, eliminating processing fees, giving you a better price than other payment processing methods, while at the same time supporting a union-friendly business with a specialized skill set to meet your needs. Your members will thank you when they pay their dues at their convenience without waiting in line to deposit cash or check. Start preparing for the future today by calling 206-595-8631 or visiting unionly.io.
Are you looking for a better future, a career that can have you set for life, and to be a part of something that's bigger than yourself? If you are, then consider a skilled trades apprenticeship with the International Union of Painters and Allied Trades. The work of IUPAT is all around us, from the industrial painters who work on the bridges to drywall finishers, floor coverers, the glazers who install the glass in our skylines, and so much more. With an IUPAT apprenticeship, you earn while you learn and receive benefits while learning the trade, including a pension. We provide world-class education free of charge. That's right, no student debt. Our starting salaries for apprentices that graduate is above the national median salary with benefits for entire families. And you have the flexibility to take your trade wherever you'd like in the country to work. IUPAT District Council 77 covers our entire region, so give Adam Booth a call at 205-603-3142 for more information. Again, that phone number is 205-603-3142. Come build a better future with us today and join IUPAT.
I'm attorney Tommy Sinyard. When you've been injured and need help, you need a lawyer who's with you.
Sinyard Law. You need attorneys always available to take care of you. Sinyard Law.
And keep you in the loop. It's your case. You need to know what's happening.
Sinyard Law. And never a charge to meet with us to evaluate your case. Sinyard Law.
A new firm, but an old name. One that will stay with you every step of the way.
Sinyard Law, the name with proven results.
Support for this program is provided by the International Association for Machinists and Aerospace Workers, Local Lodge 44 in Decatur, Alabama. Learn more at iamaw44.org.
Come on, you poor workers, good news to you I'll tell. How the good old union has come in here to dwell.
Labor creates all wealth should go to labor, and you are listening to the Valley Labor Report. My name is Jacob Morrison, here with my co-host Adam Keller. If you've got anything to add, you can give us a call, 844-899-TVLR. We've got a really quick story wanted to fill you in on before we bring on Brandon Mancilla. This coming out of Finland. Petteri Orpo is the leader of the current government coalition in Finland. It is a coalition of center-right and far-right parties. They took office in June, and since then, there has been more politically motivated industrial action than all Finnish governments from 1991 to 2023, according to Taivo Haimi in Jacobin magazine. And that is because of the agenda of this right-wing coalition government in Finland. The agenda is to make it easier to fire workers, to abolish mandatory sick pay for the first day of illness, restricting the right to strike, destroying the sectoral bargaining system, which is huge in Finland because, like in many Nordic countries and Scandinavian countries, Finland has no minimum wage. Workers in Finland rely on the collective bargaining system and union contracts to set minimum wages across the country. And so that's actually how they do it. They have, in effect, a much higher minimum wage than the United States, but that is because every workplace in Finland is covered by a union contract, basically. And so this government wants to destroy that system, wants to destroy the sectoral bargaining system. They also want to set a ceiling for wage increases based on exports, which would particularly harm service sector jobs where women dominate. They want to cut unemployment payments and Social Security, among other things. And all of these anti-worker stuff was not really at the front of their agenda during the campaign. It was primarily just about the national debt. There was not a whole lot of explicit mention of how they're going to cut the national debt, which is how politicians do it in this country. They fearmonger about the national debt, but they don't actually talk about what they want to do to bring down the national debt. So that's what happened here. And now that they're in the government, they've released this plan, and it's incredibly unpopular, which is why there has been more industrial action and strike action taken by Finnish workers than against all governments from 1991 to 2023 combined. So unions are resisting by waves of protests, walkouts, strikes, and all of that culminated in February, where 13,000 workers marched on the Capitol as 300,000 were on strike. For reference, Finland has a population of 5.5 million people compared to the United States' 330 million people. And last year, the United States had some 400,000 workers that went on strike. And that was a record high for, in decades, right? So this is, a much, much higher rate of industrial action than we see in the United States. And proportionately to the population, it would be as if 18 million workers went on strike at one time, right? These 300,000 workers were on strike at one time, whereas the 300,000 workers in the United States who went on strike last year it was not concerted. It was not all at one time. It was at different locations and different times and against different employers and for different reasons. These are 300,000 people striking all at once for one reason. I mean, just totally different set of circumstances and much more impactful. 52% of the Finnish public supports these strikes, 42% oppose. Right now, there are still 7,000 dock and industrial workers who have continued the strike now in a second week, and the unions say that they are willing to escalate higher. Their biggest weapon is obviously a general strike, which has not happened in Finland since 1956. For more reading on this, you can check out Brett Wilkins in Common Dreams. Brett Wilkins in Common Dreams. Title of the article: Finnish unions extend strikes to fight right-wing attack on labor safety net. You can also read Finland's right-wing government is trying to crush labor in Jacobin magazine by Toivo Haimi. So we're going to continue a theme of internationalism by bringing on Brandon Mancilla, UAW Region 9A Director, that is up in the Northeast, about the UAW's call for a ceasefire in Gaza. Brandon, welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me. Good to be here.
Great to have you. Big fan of what you're doing up there, and appreciate you taking the time to come on the show. So, I think one thing that may be worth starting the conversation with just explaining to people what is happening in Gaza, because I think that one of the reasons that there are such divergent opinions on the situation in Gaza is that there are some people who actually see physically videos of stuff that's going on and it's coming across their social media feeds and they're inundated day after day, hour by hour with scenes from Gaza. And then there are other people who never hear anything about it. They're in just a totally different bubble and they never hear about it. And then when they do, it's all kind of euphemistic language and they're not really getting an understanding of what's going on. So that maybe that's a good place to start. Can explain to us generally What is happening in Gaza?
Sure. Well, first of all, I just want to say that I'm a big fan of your show. Our assistant director in Region 9A, Vail Quinert-Yant, is also a religious listener of your show. So we really appreciate this invitation and chance to talk with all of you, and really love the work you guys do. We need more of it.
Well,
So
appreciate it, and we'll have to get Vail on the show at some point too.
yeah, that's absolutely right. I think she'd love to also. So yeah, what's happening right now in Palestine and Israel is it's absolutely a tragedy. Since October 7th, there have been over 30,000 as that we know of Palestinians that have been killed in Israel's retaliatory bombing campaign in Gaza. As of right now, over 1 million people are at risk of famine because humanitarian aid cannot enter Gaza because Israel is blocking the aid coming in. And it's in my opinion, a deliberate policy of starving out the Palestinian people. And it's a genocide that Israel is now carrying out and using October 7th as the reason to carry out this policy. All of this is being done with support of the U.S. government through the weapons and the political backing, even though, the reports now is that there's some tension between the Biden administration and the Secretary of State and Netanyahu's government. Even though that may be true, it's not enough that from keeping the U.S. from continuing to support Israel's campaign right now. So not enough has happened yet to actually challenge that status quo. But I think what it's really important to figure out is that October 7th was not the beginning of this crisis. We're talking about a long history here of oppression, of dispossession, of apartheid that has created the conditions for what is happening right now. So it's absolutely a moral responsibility for all people of conscience, for the labor movement, for social movements as a whole in the United States, to continue pushing and pressuring our own government, because that's what we can control. Our people, the American people, can pressure our government from stopping its direct support for the state of Israel's extreme policies and its campaign against the Palestinian people right now. And the reason this is important, right, to understand that not all of this began on October 7th is because at some point, too late, but at some point the bombing will stop, right? And we're going to have a real reckoning with what the aftermath of that is, and not simply return to what the status quo was before October, which was also untenable and unbearable for so many people. So the only way forward is to actually really analyze what that situation was, which in my opinion, a situation of apartheid, of massive oppression and restriction on the Palestinian people. And the only way to build a legitimate, lasting peace process, one that recognizes the humanity of Palestinians and Israeli people alike, is one that actually commits to that peace and finds a different way, a different political, economic, and social system in the region that accounts for everyone's humanity.
Right. Well, and having laid out some of that, then I think the next question is, in particular to what's happening now, right? Is why is that something that we should oppose in the United States? Because the people that support it would say, sure, yeah, it's sad that there are innocent people dying, but this is war, and this has to happen. This must happen for anything to move forward is what they're going to say. And so why is it that we should actually we shouldn't believe that, and that we should oppose what's going on right now in Gaza?
Yeah, so obviously, I think as a moral responsibility, this should matter to all people of conscience, as I said, and especially in the labor movement. An injury to one is an injury to all. That's a key pillar of what we believe solidarity means, right? Standing with all oppressed people. But I'll go further than that. The reality is that we are complicit, right, as Americans, with our taxpayer dollars, and with our government's policies and political support towards the state of Israel in perpetuating not just the killing right now, but also the system that allowed the conditions for this to happen in the first place, right? So our own taxpayer dollars, our weapons, our political resources, the politicians we elect, they're all still, for the vast majority, the most part, are giving vocal and concrete support, right? So if you are a person who believes that there should be peace, that there should be an end to mass killing and starvation, then you need to point the finger to the people who are responsible for carrying that out, right? So, the United States government does not control the state of Israel, but it does provide the key resources and political support and the weapons to be able to allow Israel to carry out its campaign right now. So that's exactly the reason why we should care about it, because we are directly tied to it.
And I think that's a good thing to emphasize, because there are, in talking about this, maybe the next thing is like, okay, maybe even it's bad. Maybe even they'll grant you like, okay, sure, maybe it's bad. Let's just grant that for the sake of conversation. But why are you so focused on Israel? Why Israel? Why is Israel the center of a lot of this discussion about foreign policy? And it's exactly like you say. It's not anti-Semitic. It's not terror supporting. It's that we are intimately involved in what's going on here. Unlike, some of the other, lots of terrible things are going on all over the world, but we are not really as involved in a lot of those terrible things. And then in some places where we are involved in the terrible things, like what's going on with Yemen and Saudi Arabia, the defenders of U.S. action are not as vociferous, right? I mean, there's a whole cadre of people that defend to the hilt every single action that Israel takes, and it's just not that way with what's going on with Saudi Arabia, right? We support Saudi Arabia, and you and I haven't talked to you about Saudi Arabia, but I'm fairly confident that I can say that you're not a supporter of the Saudi regime, and we oppose that, but we don't have people on the other side making an entire career of being Saudi apologists, right? It just doesn't happen. People kind of accept it and move on and that's just the way it is. But with Israel, it's different. There's a whole complex of people that are dedicated to defending Israel. And so when you have one, intimate connection to what's going on there, and two, vociferous pushback against the most banal observations of what's going on, then of course, we're going to have to talk about it, and we're probably going to have to talk about it a little bit more, right? What do you think about that? How does that track with your understanding of how you would respond to people who say that it's anti-Semitic to oppose Israel's actions, or that would call you a Hamas supporter?
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, the number one thing is I am not a Hamas supporter. I'm a left-wing labor organizer. I think the ideology that Hamas as a movement subscribes to is not the one that I share. It's not the vision of the world that I subscribe to. But I think it's really important to emphasize that what's happening right now is government policy and retaliation for an attack on October 7th that at this point has been completely disproportionate, right, to the original attack by Hamas, right? And it's a policy of, at this point, mass starvation and a plausible case of genocide, as the International Court of Justice has preliminarily decided, right? So we're talking about 1 million people at risk of dying of starvation, right? That is much bigger than any one political group is capable of doing in Palestine. So the criticism of the state of Israel, it's very important for everyone to recognize this, is not the same as anti-Semitism. And there's number of reasons for that. Number one is that many, pro-peace Jewish labor activists, Jewish activists, social movement leaders, and including increasingly people within Israel itself, are criticizing their own government's actions at this point, right? So it's really important for us to be able to speak out about this in a way that's morally responsible and correct, to completely unattach those from each other. So yeah, criticism of Israel is not the same as anti-Semitism. Any government led by any people, any group of people who are carrying out this level of violence needs to be opposed and criticized by labor and by people of conscience. And that's just the bottom line for me. The bottom line is you see a government that has at this point killed more than 30,000 people that we know of, right? This toll is growing tragically. That is not a government that we are supposed to stand by and make apologies for. Now, there's a long history. I'm not, an expert on the history of the region like some other people would be able to explain to you just how exactly we got to this point with this very close relationship between the U.S. and the state of Israel. But the reason is that it exists, right? There's a very long history for that. But I think increasingly younger people and more Americans are coming to a real awakening at this point, that if you care about, even the future of the Middle East and the end of global conflict or potential global conflict, right? If you don't want another world war, if you don't want another, Middle East, at least regional conflict, this one is exactly the place where we need to start calling for peace and opposing, the constant calls for more and more killing. And again, we are responsible. We are complicit in this. We are a part of it because our government continues to fund and politically back the actions of Israel.
And then I think the next question is, okay, well, so even let's say that you can have this opinion as a citizen, as an individual, and maybe that makes sense and all of this, and you can put on your citizen cap and you can say, I oppose what's going on in Israel. But why should you be doing this in your capacity as a labor leader, as one of the, regional directors of the UAW, one of the largest unions in the United States, one of the, how many regions are there? 9 or 10? There's not... Yeah, there are not very many region directors, and so you're kind of really getting into the upper echelon of kind of labor in the United States, and so why should labor be involved? Why is it that you're doing this in your capacity as a labor leader as opposed to your capacity as a citizen? Why is it that unions should be thinking about and talking about and advocating for foreign policy positions at all?
Well, I think it's really important to recognize that unions like the UAW and other national unions in our country and international unions have always taken political positions. This idea that unions are not political organizations is completely off. Like, unions are political organizations. We constantly donate, just at the very a basic fact that we donate a lot of money, right, to candidates, right, for office. We do lobbying on worker issues, on union issues. So we're political organizations, and that is not a bad thing. I think we need to be democratic political organizations. I mean, we need to represent the interests and the issues of our members. But there's no such thing as an apolitical union. That's number one. Number two, unions have also taken foreign policy positions, right? Throughout the Cold War, during World War II, and even very recently, at the war in Iraq, unions took stances, right? During World War II, we supported the war effort against Nazi Germany, for example, right? Throughout the Cold War, unions were split on how exactly, whether they were going to support, the U.S. in that Cold War divide, right? At times, we've also broken with U.S. policies, such as the interventions in Central America in the 1980s and the war in Iraq in 2003 and after that, right? So unions are not organizations that stay out of these discussions. They have stayed out of talking about Palestine and Israel. And that hides the fact that for a long time, we've actually been pretty supportive of the state of Israel, right? From its founding up until very recently. A lot of, the history of the founding of the state of Israel had a lot of labor support, including U.S. labor support, including also the UAW. Actually, there's some institutions and organizations in Israel that have the names of U.S. labor leaders, for example. So we have been involved and taken positions in support. but why should we care, right? Why should we care as union members, and why should we care as union leaders? I think the reason is because when labor gets serious about a political issue or a social movement, right, it's the organization that has the power to actually change things. Number one, because we have the ability to shut down industry or the sector that we've organized in, right? We have the ability to withhold our labor, right? But second, we have immense political power, right? Just look at how we were able to navigate in the UAW, the Big Three strike, and the just transition language that we won to be able to secure EV jobs and battery jobs of the future for our UAW members now, right? That took a lot. That wasn't just a strike. That was also our political power and our political influence and the weight of our endorsements that led to that, right? So when labor commits to something, it gives other social movement organizations, other activists, other communities a real big muscle behind demands, right? And I think that's really important. I think the other reason we should care is as leaders, right? I'll speak from the leadership side now, is because our members care, right? We're going through a crazy, awesome momentum right now in organizing, right? From Starbucks to our auto sector to higher ed to every single industry you can think of right now is really hot because workers want to organize and they want to join unions because they want justice. They want economic and social justice and improving working conditions, right? Who doesn't want that? But as we've organized more and more, especially with younger workers, we're realizing that, people, the consciousness in this country has changed, right? So workers are coming into their unions for the first time, right? With different ideas and perspectives on what the world should look like and what our position as a country should be in relation to something like Palestine, right? That's in the ceasefire. That's like a really that's been very clear for all of us that have been in the UAW is just how many members organically, without any, necessarily any resolution at a local or from the international, have already been organizing. And they've been organizing, I think, really important, right? Rank and file members with their UAW hats on, right? With their jackets on, with their swag, meaning they identify them protesting in the street with their labor union identity, right? It's the same thing to them. It's like, if I am a UAW member, I am an SEIU member, I am a teacher, and I am also doing this, I'm also showing up to this protest, my body out in the street with my swag on, right? That's been a very important change, where in the past, I think people were just like, there's always been protests, but has it always been carrying that labor label with you, right? That's been a really huge change. So how things have moved within, I think, the entire labor movement, right? We've gone from 6 months ago or 5 months ago, however long it's been, Mark Dimmenstein, the Postal Workers Union president, being the only person on the executive council. Sean Fain wasn't at that meeting, but Dimmenstein being the only person in the council who was calling for a ceasefire, to the entire AFL calling for a ceasefire, and almost every affiliate coming out with their own statement, right? Or their own resolution. That didn't just happen, right? Because people had a change of heart. That took immense pressure. And for that reason, we have to look at what workers were doing. And it's still not, I would say, so widespread that it's, I think, the central labor political demand of the moment, but it's growing, it's getting there. And we can't ignore what happened in states like, Michigan, where there's no path to the White House for Joe Biden this fall without Michigan. And he had 100,000 people vote uncommitted, right? He needs to think about that. He absolutely needs to reconcile with that.
Yes. And, just speaking very briefly on that, the people who vote uncommitted are actually probably some of the most committed people, in actuality. These are the people that like want to come out and vote against a Republican, and they're wanting to send you a message, right, that they are unhappy. That people who are actually uncommitted are the tens, hundreds of thousands of people who stayed home, right, and who you need to activate and who you need to encourage to get to the polls, and you have to have those people who voted uncommitted to activate them, right? Those are going to be your people that would normally be, staffing your campaign, volunteering for your campaign, knocking on doors, making phone calls. And if you're not able to activate your activists, you're not going to be able to get the people who are truly uncommitted to even come out to vote, much less to vote for you. So I think that's an incredibly important point. But back to if I could, just to build on the justification for unions making foreign policy positions, or having foreign policy positions, it's worth noting that deciding to not have a foreign policy position is a foreign policy position, right? It's not as if that has no effect, but the effect is you are taking the organized working class out of the decision-making process. That is the political decision when unions choose to stay out of foreign policy discussions. You are taking the organized working class out of the decision-making process. And that's a political decision, and it's a political decision I oppose, because I think you're exactly right that unions are political institutions, and the idea that we should not think of ourselves that way is completely backwards, right? And even, what we're doing in the workplace is political if you because politics is not just what people think, is not just what people do every 4 years, voting for a Republican or a Democrat. Politics is people's lives and how we, operate and move within society and how we want to change society. And so obviously what we do in the workplace through our unions is political, and we need to understand that, and we need our members to understand that, and we need our members to understand that as unions, we are the organized working class, and so everything should be our issue because our members are affected by every issue. Even if it's not going to affect your wages at work, you as a working class member of society are affected by every single thing that our government and our society does or doesn't do, and therefore it is absolutely in the purview of your union to comment on it. Now, you can choose to have your union not comment on it, but that's a political decision, and we should recognize it as such. And maybe sometimes that's the appropriate decision, but we should recognize it as political. And then, like you said, once we understand that we're going to be making a political decision one way or another, it absolutely makes sense to fight for peace, because an injury to one is an injury to all, and that's a really kind of fundamental union principle, the principle of solidarity. And so now that so I think that everybody listening is on board. So we've got everybody, Brandon, you and I, everybody's on board. We should support a ceasefire in Gaza. Unions should support a ceasefire in Gaza as unions. And so now that we've done this, we've really done a lot today. What are we doing, actually? So we've got everybody on board. What are we doing as unions to make this happen? Calling for a ceasefire. What's going on now?
Yeah, so I think again, after the UAW's call for a ceasefire, the immediate next step that we got to work on was getting more and more unions to come out as well, right? And I think that has been a shift that just even, again, 3, 4, 5 months ago, nobody would have thought possible. The next step to me is political. I think we need to support the champions of labor in elected offices who have come out, consistently been brave and stood for a ceasefire from the very beginning. I'm talking about people like Rashida Tlaib, people like Jamal Bowman in my own region, who are being attacked, right? Are being attacked by hard right-wing, genocidal, forces in this country, who not only want to continue to support the policy of the state of Israel, but also want to undo labor power, right? And fight, completely repress what we've seen the gains in the labor movement recently. And I'm talking about organizations such as AIPAC there, right? So I think we need to, stand behind people like Rashida, people like Bowman, and other progressive anti-war champions that have stood for a ceasefire and have also supported labor at every point in their careers and put their names out for us. I think we also have to start thinking as unions, right? Our own resources. Right now, we are working on investigating the possibilities of divestment from Israeli-backed securities, investments, and bonds. These are investments that directly contribute to the state of Israel's financial capacity to be able to do the things that it's doing right now. And I think the labor movement needs to look really closely at its pensions, at its strike funds, at its general fund investments, and actually start making moves to divest those resources. Because again, if the International Court of Justice is saying there's a plausible case of genocide, then the labor movement has no business investing its money, its resources, its members' pensions, its staff's pensions in the state of Israel. So that's something that we're considering doing right now, and working on. We're not there yet, but I think we're looking into it. And I think in general, we have to look at Carl Rosen, the president of the United Electrical Workers, UE, published an article just recently in Labor Notes about just how long-term the effort of UE being a champion of solidarity, international solidarity, how much work that has taken, right? How much deep member organizing, educational work that has taken. And I think we need to use this as an opportunity, right? I think the labor movement was tragically extremely behind on being able to respond to this moment. And I think now we're finally seeing, a shift that was welcome, but it's definitely, slow. But unions like the UE decided to commit to studying, its own involvement in, international issues and committing to solidarity over years, right? So they have a whole platform on international solidarity, on the role of workers in the war economy, things like that, right? That's something that UE had committed to. And I think, unions such as ours, other unions would also, I think, really benefit from kind of shifting to that work, so that, the next time there's another issue, or again, like I said, the bombs are going to stop at some point, right, in Palestine, and we're still going to be seeing the same injustices and abuses of power and conditions that led to this in the first place. We have to commit to making sure that we are educated and ready and organized to continue, standing in solidarity. So there's just a lot. You can point to so many different places, right? And I think politically, right? The labor movement has been very tied to the Democratic Party for a very long time. I think we don't have much choice in this country, right, between two parties. One or two people is going to be president every election cycle. But we know that within the Democratic Party, this issue specifically has started splintering certain elements within the party. And I think labor has a real choice to make, right? Which candidates are we going to support, right? Are we going to be able to elevate the ceasefire demand or any other demands for social and international solidarity to the forefront, right? That's something in my region that some of our political councils have already asked for, to be able to ask any candidate that we are interviewing what its position on a ceasefire is, right? Labor has the ability to do that, again, because we have the resources. We have the ability to actually not just protest and say something. We have the ability to actually back things up with resources and support and labor power. So there's a litany of things we could do, and I think it's a really important moment for, I think, labor leaders to listen to its membership and support it. One last thing I'll say concretely, I am very concerned about where the congressional committee in the House that oversees the workforce and education is going, because Virginia Fox, who's a congresswoman, has directly attacked one of my locals in Region 9A, the local 2225, which is the Association of Legal Aid Attorneys. So this is a legal service workers and nonprofit workers local in New York City mostly. And they have had a lot of controversy over a solidarity resolution and a ceasefire resolution they wanted to put out, and they ultimately voted on, but they've been met with threats of injunctions. They've had to knock that down in federal court. And now that we hope the kind of legal aspect of the challenge is over, then, Virginia Fox decided to subpoena the local. And now, the local is under subpoena, having to respond to certain, questions in that information request that House committee put forward. I think we should be absolutely clear about this. You can Google this. This is all been reported on. That is Congress trying to intervene in union democracy, right?
Yes.
So they have no problem, trying to use, this ceasefire resolutions or solidarity with Palestine resolutions as a way into it. But their overall goal is to beat back labor, period, right?
Right.
They want to just defeat labor in any way they can, right? So, I think that just shows you how important this is right now, to be able to both say, we stand by our ceasefire resolutions. We are going to continue doing and building solidarity work, international solidarity work. And at the same time, we are going to defend our members' rights to union democracy and free speech, to be able to discuss those issues, because those issues need to be discussed in our union halls and our union meetings. They shouldn't be, just abandoned because we're scared of a threat by Congress.
Mm-hmm.
Congress has no business getting involved in our affairs, right? So I want the labor movement to really recognize what the threat of that is, because if they start going after one local over one resolution, that means you're next. You're next on any other issue you want to take up. And once you set precedent with one thing and you let that slide, they can go after the whole thing. And we can't afford that right now, not with the way, with the way we're organizing and how much potential we have to really transform this country and lift so many workers up with our organizing.
Yes, I want to underscore that and just restate for people the insanity of this and just help folks understand how wild this is. A UAW local voted democratically. It was like 2-1. It was not close. It was not close. The vote in favor of endorsing a ceasefire, endorsing the call for a ceasefire in Gaza. This local voted 2-1 in favor of this resolution. And now we have a congressional committee subpoenaing this local union into their process for passing this resolution. It's absurd, and it's obviously, like you said, an attack on labor, an attack on union democracy, but also an attack on free speech. And so therefore we've obviously, Brandon, we've seen a lot of the same suspects around this issue, free speech warriors and the like, coming out in your defense. Even though sometimes they may have political disagreements because some of these people are on the right, they're coming to your defense, right?
Well, not as many as you'd like there to be. I'd love for you to show me some tweets of the free speech warriors coming out.
I was just assuming that you would be able to provide me with that, because it's so obviously an attack on free speech.
A bad faith attack. You would hope.
But so you're telling me that you've not seen people, like Jordan Peterson or, the Ben Shapiro's or these other people coming out.
I think Jordan Peterson's too busy figuring out whether the Nazis were a left-wing movement. That's what he's busy doing.
Okay. Well, that's sounds like it's going to take some time to work through that problem. So, all right. Well, that's unfortunate. But yeah, I just wanted to emphasize for folks how insane that is. That's absolutely beyond the pale, and even obviously people who make free speech their issue, they should obviously be coming out against this attack by the Republicans in the U.S. House of Representatives. But like you said, other unions, even unions that consider themselves, and members of unions who consider themselves pro-Israel, should be concerned about this and should be coming out in opposition to this. Because like you said, if we start going down this path where Congress can subpoena a union anytime they pass a resolution that they politically disagree with, that is a very dangerous road to go down. And we should not allow that precedent to be set. Brandon, I really appreciate you taking the time. I don't have any other questions. Adam, do you?
No, I just wanted to thank you so much for taking a little bit of time to come on the show today, and thank you for the work that you're doing. And if you had any final words of encouragement or final words to pass along to us labor union folks down here in the South.
Yeah, I think at every level, wherever you are, union or non-union, right? This is the moment to be organizing. UAW's taken on an insanely ambitious goal right now to organize the auto sector and battery work. But we hope to be inspiring the labor movement as a whole, and workers around the country to organize. And once you organize, once you're in a union, I think the most powerful thing about a union is that it's the only real democratic institution that workers have in this country, right? So if you care about, a ceasefire, if you care about international solidarity, and you're a working class person, a union is going to be the place where you're going to be able to have power in this country and try to do something about those issues. So, if your local hasn't passed a resolution, if your international hasn't heeded the call, you have to, I think, keep pushing and keep up the fight. And I just hope that this is a moment for us to really commit to international solidarity work in a way that we haven't in the past.
Brandon Mancilla, UAW Region 9A Director, thank you for your time. Appreciate it.
All right. Thanks, guys.
Appreciate you.
We're going to go ahead and take a break. We're going to come back and wrap up with a couple of updates from the Alabama legislature and Boss Watch. Stay tuned.
In Alabama, more than 200,000 of our friends and neighbors are living without health care coverage. Often folks can't stay healthy enough to keep their jobs. We need to fix this. Let's close the health care coverage gap. To learn more, visit coveralabama.org.
Support for this program also comes from the Iron Workers, Local 477. So if you are looking for contractors with lower than average EMR and TRIR, they tell me that if you need to know what those mean, then you will. Or if you need to supplement a workforce at any level for any amount of time, short or long term, if you need iron workers that come trained and certified at no extra cost, or if you need workers from superintendent down to general laborer, and you're looking to start work on a project, or you're unhappy with your current contractor situation, you need to call my friend Jeb Miles with the Ironworkers Local 477. They only work with the best in the business, vetted contractors, and can do all kinds of jobs, from roofing to steel and bridge erection, from welding to heavy rigging, from structural repairs to machinery alignment, and much more. They supply manpower on 4 of the 5 largest projects in North Alabama, so you know they're legit. If you need good quality, safe, efficient, diligent, and knowledgeable workers on your job, then you need the Ironworkers Local 477. Call Jeb Miles at 256-383-3334 or via email at local477@bellsouth.net, and make sure you tell them that you heard about them on the Valley Labor Report.
We're the nurses, firefighters, and claims representatives that help keep our government services running. We respond to natural disasters. We care for our nation's veterans, and we investigate discrimination in the workplace. We are federal and D.C. government workers, and we are proud to serve the American people. Working in more than 70 agencies across the government, we know we can fulfill our mission because our union has our back. Learn more at afge.org. Paid for by the American Federation of Government Employees, AFL-CIO.
The Laborers International Union of North America, Local 366, is proudly recruiting North Alabama workers to work construction and nuclear plant maintenance. If you're interested, please contact Donna at their training center to start the process. That phone number is 256-415-7452. Again, that phone number is 256-415-7452. No experience is needed. Free training is offered, but you must be able to pass a background check and a drug test. Local hiring that grows our community with good-paying jobs that have benefits is their mission. Live better, work union, Local 366, feel the power.
Support for this program also comes from the Mid-South Council of Retail, Wholesale, and Department Store Union. Learn more at rwdsu.info.
I'm attorney Tommy Sinyard. When you've been injured and need help, you need a lawyer who's with you.
Synyard Law. You need attorneys always available to take care of you. Synyard Law.
And keep you in the loop. It's your case. You need to know what's happening.
Synyard Law. And never a charge to meet with us to evaluate your case. Synyard Law.
A new firm, but an old name. One that will stay with you every step of the way.
Synyard Law. The name with proven results.
Come on, you poor workers, good news to you I'll tell, how the good old union has come in here to dwell.
Alabama's only union talk radio show and the labor radio program in the South. This is the Valley Labor Report. My name is Jacob Morrison. My co-host is Adam Keller. Folks, if you missed that conversation with Brandon Mancilla, check it out. You can find it on our YouTube page, or it'll be out in the next couple of days as a podcast. Appreciate everybody tuning in. We've got some 30 people watching us right now and only 22 likes. Let's get those numbers up. Like the stream if you haven't. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't. Appreciate everybody tuning in. We've got Mel, Joe, John. The chat is loading. I just refreshed the page and now I can't see the chat. But yeah, appreciate everybody tuning in. It's been really enjoyed that interview. It was good stuff. We've got some more for you today. Let's start with this new bill out of the Alabama legislature, filed by State Senator Arthur Orr. This guy he just needs to calm down. That's my advice to Senator Orr. You're going to be in this.
He's been busy this
He's
session.
been busy. Look, you're going to be a state senator for decades, probably. For better or worse, you're going to be in this position as long as you want it. So, look, man, you got some time. Just chill out. Chill out. You got so much stuff going on. No reason for that. That's bonkers, the amount of bills that this guy is sponsoring. It's absolutely Looney Tunes. But the bill that I want to talk about this week was filed just in the last week. It is a bill attacking voluntary recognition, an employer's right to voluntarily recognize their workers' union. His bill would prohibit state subsidies from being given to employers that voluntarily recognize their employer's union. And so to understand how, the implications of this and why it's bad, I'm going to explain voluntary recognition and also explain the process by which people normally vote in their union, because voluntary recognition is not common. But it is a process for recognition of a union as the representative of the bargaining unit in the National Labor Relations Act. It is absolutely a process that can be done and is legally protected. And because of that, because it is specifically a path laid out in the National Labor Relations Act or in the in the policy and guidance surrounding it, this bill is probably illegitimate. I don't know if unconstitutional is the word that maybe, yeah, it would be unconstitutional, because even though the NLRA is not part of the Constitution says that federal law supersedes state law, and so the preemption of federal law by a state would be unconstitutional. So yeah, I think it's unconstitutional because it says it tries to discourage an avenue for unionization specifically laid out by the National Labor Relations Act. So this is almost certainly unconstitutional. It will certainly be challenged and therefore will cost the taxpayers of Alabama millions of dollars needlessly. And I've seen some arguments defending its constitutionality by saying that there are states that encourage voluntary recognition, and that is not unconstitutional. And my response to that would be that it's not, that it's fine to encourage a process that is legitimate under the National Labor Relations Act, because it's laid out. And so there's every reason that you could encourage that, but to actually affirmatively discourage one of those processes, I think, is a different thing, and it seems to me unconstitutional. But, obviously, whether or not a thing is unconstitutional is not objective or, something that we can discover in the world. It's a political term. And because politically the courts are made up of, the Federalist Society freaks and anti-worker, pro-business goons, I do not have a lot of, confidence that the Supreme Court, if it goes that far, would rule on the side of, common sense. It would find some justification to say that this is fine. But it will cost the taxpayers of Alabama millions of dollars in the process, and it's bad. So just to help you understand what voluntary recognition is, typically, or the primary process by which employees unionize is an NLRB election, and that happens after enough employees sign authorization cards, and then at that point, at 30% cards signed, the union can request an election. At 50% cards signed, the union can request voluntary recognition, in which circumstance the employer can reject it and they can file for an NLRB election. But either way, at 30% or 50% or more, and by the employer or the employees, an NLRB election can be held. And so that's typically the way that you can do it. But like I said, workers can ask for voluntary recognition, and that is a legitimate path laid out in the National Labor Relations Act and its policy and guidance. And that's just, it's pretty self-explanatory. If you've got 50% more than, and it's typically a lot more than 50% of your workers signing an authorization card saying, and the authorization cards are not ambiguous. They say, I hereby authorize such and such union to represent me as my exclusive bargaining agent in my employment with such and such company, right? It is extremely unambiguous. It is not, these authorization cards are not saying, I'm interested in unionization, I'd like to learn more, or I would like to have an election. They are saying, I want the UAW, or I want this union to be my union in this workplace. That's what they're saying. And so you can bring, it must be at least 50% plus one. So most of the time it's more. You can bring those cards signed by the workers to the company, and the company can see those cards and voluntarily recognize the will of their workers and recognize the union as their bargaining representative. And then they can go on more speedily, and that is kind of the plus of it. It gets you to the bargaining table more quickly than having to go through an election process if it's already obvious that the workers want a union. And so that's all voluntary recognition is the employer seeing that that the workers want a union and have affirmatively made that known through the signing of authorization cards and saying, okay, I recognize you. Let's get to the bargaining table and hammer out a first contract. The reason for Orr's bill is ostensibly to protect employees from coercion, from big labor. And now, look, just on its face, the worry about coercion is really not well-founded because obviously the level of leverage that an employer has over a worker is much higher than the leverage is much more than the leverage that a union has over a worker that it does not represent, obviously. But also, in the voluntary recognition process. There is a process by which employees who feel that coercion has been utilized as a tactic by the union, which is illegitimate, obviously, in the case of a union election, who feel that coercion has been utilized, they can file a complaint with the National Labor Relations Board and force an election to say that, look, an employee can go to the National Labor Relations Board and say, look, I think that coercion was used. I don't think actually that the people who signed these cards, I think that they did it under some kind of duress. I don't think it's legitimate. I think we need to have a secret ballot election to make sure that we know that this is actually the will of the employees. There's a process by which that fear of coercion can be addressed. And so the solution is already there. This bill is a pro-employer solution in search of a problem that has already been resolved by the National Labor Relations Act. And so then the actual thing here is just to put one more impediment to unionization in front of the workers and make it that much more difficult and give the employers one more reason why they say that they're not going to voluntarily recognize their workers' union. And so it's in its effect, it will not be very large, but it is obviously bad. It is a bad bill because it needlessly places one more impediment to unionization in front of workers in a context in which there are already innumerable barriers to unionization.
Yeah, we should be going in the exact opposite direction. Yes. And that is, something that really, really bothers me is that we should be rewarding good behavior, not punishing good behavior.
Yeah.
Right? Companies can and should voluntarily recognize the union. There is no need to force a costly and unnecessary and potentially divisive election on your workforce. If a majority of workers have signed union cards, go ahead and recognize them. And that is, and one thing that I want to point out is this is a direct attack on community benefits agreements throughout the country, including here in Alabama. There are community benefits agreements that include neutrality and card check agreements, which, basically formalize that this will be the path that a union will, be legally recognized. Basically in these community benefits agreements, the company will agree to remain neutral and to recognize the union if the workers decide to unionize, right? Obviously, it's up to the workers to do that. This is just the process, right?
Right.
And so we should be using public dollars to uplift the public. And it's really offensive, I think, for this bill to even be entertained. And I know this bill has been, shopped around from state to state. I know it's already the law in some other places, and it's completely ridiculous. We should be doing the exact opposite. We should be we should tie subsidies and incentives to the labor rights and labor records of these companies, right? There is a good bill in the legislature right now that would take away subsidies and incentives for companies that violate child labor laws. That's good. We need more of that, and we need to have more community benefits agreements and more neutrality card check agreements, not less of them. This is the wrong direction to go in. So I definitely encourage every union member, union ally, active, retired, whatever the situation may be, call on your legislator. Call them. Start with your senator. I would start with your senator this week. Go ahead and reach out to them. Let them know you're opposed to SB 231. You do not want to see this bill. Send them a follow-up email. Definitely let them know that you're not happy about this, and we'll keep you posted on this fight for sure.
Yes, and just one more thing, and we're probably not going to be able to get Boss Watch. We're going to do it in the second half of the program in overtime. But one more thing on this: this bill is the The theory behind this bill, right, is that there is employer behavior that is so, bad, has such a negative effect on society that the state has an interest in discouraging that behavior. And like Adam said, this is such an offensive bill, while we in the state of Alabama are the fourth most deadly state in the union for working people. There are only 3 other states in which you are more likely to die on the job than in Alabama. We have recipients of state subsidies who are receiving tens of thousands of dollars in fines from OSHA because of their illegal endangerment of their employees. We have recipients of state subsidies who are receiving tens of thousands of dollars in fines because of their illegal exploitation of children, who are putting children in facilities that have amputation hazards that are so egregious as to, again, be illegal. This is the kind of stuff that we've got going on all across the state of Alabama, and that is employer behavior. And we do not have bills to address that employer behavior. We do not have bills to curtail that employer behavior. Instead, we have bills right now to curtail employer behavior that voluntarily and non-combatively recognizes their workers' will to unionize. I mean, it is so offensive. And you, even as a non-union worker, even as an anti-union worker, right? If you're an anti-union worker, or even, there aren't very many of those anti-union workers, but, an anti-union employer perhaps. And most employers are not going to be violating the law in this way. You should be offended. Everybody should be offended that this is the priority of at least this senator, and we'll see how far this bill goes. But if this bill passes, then we will see that this is the priority of politicians in the state of Alabama, putting up one more barrier for unionization, for workers to express their will and to organize. That is a much higher priority than protecting those workers from actual danger like death, right? It's much more important to put up a barrier for unionization than it is to protect employees from death. That is the priority of a person that puts this bill in front of others.
Right. It's very concerning. Senator Arthur Orr at phone number 334-261-0758. That's his number if you want to get in touch with him and let him know how you feel about it. It's very concerning. He wants to use state power to discourage unionization when we just had more evidence come out this week that unions, newsflash, are good for working people.
Right.
Better pay, better benefits, better lives, more democracy. And that's what they want to use state power to discourage. They want to interfere with the private decisions of business. They want to use big government to interfere with the rights of businesses to treat their workers with respect. That's a shame.
Yeah, they're all the time talking about how we don't want the state to interfere in business. But if the business is doing something like recognizing their workers' will to join a union, then actually, the state does have an interest in interfering in business decisions. That's absurd.
I know we got to wrap up real quick. I wanted to just remind folks that we have a Unions 101 webinar on Tuesday, the 26th at 6 p.m. You can go to the North Alabama Area Labor Council Facebook page if you want to find out more. AFL-CIO has an organizing institute April 17th through 19th. Alabama Arise is hosting its annual legislative day on April 2nd. Go ahead and get your registration in. And the next day on April 3rd is the AFL-CIO Roadkill Barbecue. And there was a lot we didn't get to today, but we'll get to it in overtime.
Yeah. All right, folks. Yeah, so that's going to be it for us today. Find us on Facebook and YouTube and continue listening to the program at The Valley Labor Report if you are on the radio. If you're on WMMT, you can do that, or you can just wait until a couple of days from now when you'll be able to hear Overtime on the radio. So appreciate WMMT for airing Overtime on the radio over there. TVLR.fm/donate is where you can go to donate to the program, make a one-time or monthly recurring contribution. Pre-order these hats. The last time that we did this, that we ran this hat, was 3 years ago.
Been a while.
It's been a while. So if you want to get one of these hats, then the only way to guarantee, I mean, we're going to get some extra, right? But the only way to guarantee you get one of these hats is to pre-order at TVLR.fm/store, $35 plus shipping if applicable. We've also got some shirts there that are left over.
Limited edition.
Limited
folks.
edition.
You want to get your
USA.
hands on it for sure. I mean, you never know.
Yeah.
Could be worth something one day.
That's right. That's right. Could be worth something one day. Yeah, for sure. TVLR.fm/store is where you can get that. And with that, heading off the radio. Appreciate everybody listening. We'll see you next week. Okay. All right. Just wrapped up the first half of the program. We've got another half of the show to go. Really looking forward to this Overtime. We've got a lot of good stuff. We're going to be talking to the folks from Fragile Juggernaut, Haymarket Books podcast about the CIO. We're going to
really
be
good.
Yes,
really good.
Really good stuff. We're going to be taking a look at, we're going to do Boss Watch. We're going to take a look at another piece of legislation in Alabama. And we are going to be taking a look at some NLRB decisions. Lots of stuff going on in the second half of the program, so make sure you stay tuned. We're going to be right back with it.
Come on, you poor workers, good news to you I'll tell, how the good old union has come in here to dwell.
welcome back. You are still listening to the Valley Labor Report. My name is Jacob Morrison. My co-host is Adam Keller. If you're listening to us as a podcast, give us a 5-star rating. Tell your friends to give us a 5-star rating. Go on your spouse's phone, open up Apple Podcasts, and give us a 5-star rating. Do all of those things. If you're listening to us on YouTube, like the stream, subscribe to the channel, TVLR.fm/donate to help us stay on the air. Get your local to sponsor the show, your international to sponsor the show, your state council to sponsor the show. All of that would be very welcome. Huntsville Dimworker in the chat said, #we dare defend states' rights to F everything up. And yeah, that's it. Alabama's motto is we dare defend our rights. And like, you know, in a vacuum, you know, when I hear that, I'm like, hell yeah, brother. You know, like, that's awesome. We dare defend our rights. That's a great motto. I love that. We should defend our rights. We should defend our rights from, politicians who want to do everything they can to hurt us. We should defend our rights from corporations who want to steal everything they can from the value that we create. That's just a great motto. But unfortunately, it's not actually the way that it came about. It arose, from what they're saying is we dare defend our right as a state to oppress and exploit and abuse our citizens and aid and abet corporations as they do the same. That's what they're talking about, and like that is just such a bummer because it's such a cool motto, but used for in such a terrible, terrible, terrible way. So let's do this really quick story about the NLRB before we talk to our friends from Fragile Juggernaut. So there's a new publication by Matt Bruenig. I'm a fan of Matt Bruenig. Some people don't like him. They think he's, kind of abrasive and not very nice. And I think that's true, but also he does very good work, I think. I think he does good work. I think he's very smart, and I think he has interesting things to say. So his new publication is NLRB Edge. NLRB Edge. You can follow it nlrbedge.com. And what he's doing is he's basically taking NLRB cases and he's he's kind of doing a similar thing that we do around, union elections and things like this. And he's doing it for NLRB decisions around other things like, the rulemaking and stuff like that. And so he's doing that. There's already been some really interesting cases that he's talked about just since he started this. And one I wanted to share with you was United Parcel Service 372. United Parcel Service 372 NLRB number 158. That is the published board decision. And so the background facts here are that a UPS worker participated in a vote no campaign to reject parts of the CBA that UPS and the Teamsters were trying to get ratified by their members. The UPS fired the worker, and this is coming from Matt Bruenig, the UPS fired the worker nominally for job performance reasons. The discharge was grieved and taken to a UPS Teamsters grievance panel, which upheld the discharge. So the grievance panel's like, yea, verily, this was a justified discharge. You are still discharged. But in this case, the board determined that it would not defer to the decision of the grievance panel because the proceedings were not, quote, fair and regular, as required by the Spielberg post-arbitral deferral standard. Specifically, it found that the grievance panel had conflicts of interest in that every member of the panel, including the Teamsters members, had been involved in negotiating the CBA and wanted it to be ratified. After refusing to defer to the grievance panel's decisions, the board found that UPS had actually fired the worker for his participation in the Vote No campaign, not for job performance reasons, and ordered reinstatement and back pay. 4 months after he was fired, the worker posted disparaging things on Facebook about his managers. UPS tried to argue that this post-discharge conduct made him ineligible for reinstatement. The standard for evaluating that is whether the misconduct is so flagrant as to render the worker unfit for further service or a threat to efficiency in the plant. The statements were not deemed to be that flagrant, and so reinstatement was deemed appropriate. And so there you go. That's the facts of the case. And here's some analysis and some more context. So he said that, the standard for whether those, post-discharge statements make you ineligible are more lenient than the standard for statements that you make as an employee, which I think, kind of intuitively makes sense. If you've been discharged, you're no longer kind of theoretically under the restrictions of your former boss, right? So it's a lot more lenient.
Yeah, you would certainly hope so.
Right.
Yeah. I would imagine someone who gets fired has lots of thoughts to share about their supervisor.
And he says, just to kind of elaborate and put it in print, the rationale for this is that employers who break the law should not be able to escape the consequences just because the victims of their illegal actions have, quote, natural human reactions to unlawful acts. So therefore, it is understandable that someone fired for engaging in protected activity might get mad and say stuff like that. The board is not going to allow an employer to provoke a worker by illegally firing them and then point to the reaction of the provoked employee to argue they don't have to reinstate them. So that's a really good decision. And basically, what happened is the NLRB defended workers' rights to call their employer a knuckle dragger in certain cases if you've been discharged. And so that was one of the statements in question. The others, Atkinson, the discharged employee, now reinstated, called the supervisor, quote, a knuckle dragger who, quote, sounds like he's chewing on cotton balls and marbles when he speaks. And he described another manager as sitting in a dainty and effeminate way and speculated that this manager had erectile dysfunction. So, maybe not politically correct stuff, but you have a right to say politically incorrect things about your employer if you have been provoked by illegal action against you, says the NLRB. Amusing decision, correct decision, and good.
And folks, it's correct decisions like that is why the House Republicans have decided they want to zero out the budget for the NLRB.
Yes. Jeez,
I know that's a whole nother can of worms.
Yeah, that's a whole nother can of worms. Yeah, but it's absolutely decisions like that are one of the reasons that they do want to zero. And that's a factual statement. The House Republican Study Caucus just released their budget for fiscal year 25, and it does entail zeroing out the budget of the National Labor Relations Board, right? But this is supposedly the pro-worker party now. The working class party wants to defund in total the National Labor Relations Board. Absolutely wild. We're going to have to spend a lot of time dissecting that budget, but it does that in part. It calls for huge cuts to OSHA and MSHA and the EPA. It calls for cuts to Social Security and Medicare. It's one, but it's just another year, and it's basically the exact same budget that they've been putting out every single year. And we're still going to have Republican commentators and conservative commentators who tell you that, no, Republicans are never going to cut Social Security, as the Republican Study Caucus, which counts as its members 70% of Republicans in the House, has endorsed cutting Social Security. These people are still going to tell you not to believe your lying eyes and not to believe that Republicans want to cut Social Security. It's absolutely crazy that they have the gall to say that. It's Looney Tunes. And one of those people that do that is Cameron Smith for AL.com. He's one of these, reasonable conservative types. And he wrote an article last year that I wrote a response article to him, and we kind of feuded back and forth in AL.com about it. But, his assertion was like, oh, Republicans are never going to do this. Republicans don't want to do this. And so in my article, I was like, well, here's all the places that Republicans are saying they're going to do this. And he's just like, I don't know what you're talking about, man. It's crazy. It's wild that folks just have the, just have the cojones to just respond to facts that are undeniable and obviously true and say, I don't know what you're talking about.
Well, yeah, see, that's where you're limiting yourself. You limit yourself by the confines of material reality.
Right. That's what you get for being a materialist.
Right. Some people not bound by all that. Concepts like truth and facts and such. Why bother, right? Yep.
That's true. It would make, it would make arguing for things a lot easier if you could just make up stuff.
Yeah, and if you like didn't expect to have any logic, like you don't expect to actually have to be able to prove anything, just make stuff up.
Yeah.
And they pay people to do that, apparently.
Right. They pay so many people to do that. One of the most absurd things that I tell people is that Huntsville, a mid-sized municipality, I think generously, a mid-sized municipality in the context of the United States, has three, count them, 1, 2, 3, full-time conservative radio hosts that are paid like a full-time salary to yell on the radio about this stuff. 3 full-time. It's crazy. Absolutely Looney Tunes. And that doesn't even count the people that are responsible for like conservative stuff statewide, like Cameron Smith and AL.com. Or 1819 News Now or Yellowhammer News. It's wild how much money is pumped into people. And they don't even feel like the need to be like persuasive. They don't feel any kind of responsibility. It's bonkers. But nevertheless,
that's what we get for having morals. Damn it.
That's right.
I know.
Well, yeah. So we have a couple of folks, and they're in the Zoom now.
They are. Yes,
right?
they are. Yeah, I'm excited about this. I have been checking out the podcast, and I'm not as caught up as you are, I think, but I'm really, really digging it.
Yeah. So, Fragile Juggernaut is a new podcast from Haymarket Books about the rise and fall of the CIO and everything in between. And there's another CIO podcast by Jacobin called Organize the Unorganized. It's a very similar project, different approaches and maybe different conclusions. I don't know. I think the Fragile Juggernaut has not concluded yet, so we're going to have to see what their conclusions are. But Ben Mabee and Tim Barker are part of what they're calling their organizing committee. And so basically like every person, and it's like 12 maybe, I don't know, it's a bunch of people, and they're each doing their own episodes on different facets of the era of the CIO, before, during, and after. And so Ben Mabee and Tim Barker are our guests on the program, part of the organizing committee, joining us today on the Valley Labor Report. Tim and Ben, welcome to the program. Thanks for taking the time.
Yeah, thank you guys. Thanks for listening and thanks for having us on. We're really excited to chat with you.
Yeah, great to be here.
Great to have y'all. So, I have not listened to the most recent episode, unfortunately. I wanted to do it yesterday, and I got caught up with work and other prep for the show. So maybe you can fill us in on that. But I've listened to everything else, and like Adam said, it's really good. Highly encourage people to listen to it, and I will be listening to the most recent episode at some point. But before we talk about that, Ben and Tim, can y'all tell us about your background and what brought you to wanting to do a podcast about the CIO? Ben, we can start with you.
Well, that's great. I come from a union family, electricians and teachers. My mom was on strike just a couple of years ago in the San Francisco Bay Area, and one of the longest teacher strikes of that teacher strike wave that was kind of spreading across K-12 education during the Trump years, and I think continues to kind of roll on today. I myself was able to join the labor movement when I organized my small shop back in 2019, 2020. We went on to bargain a contract, and I've been really involved in the labor movement over the last couple of years. Right now, especially with New York Times tech workers at New York Times Tech, who are bargaining their first contract, and hopefully will be a kind of lasting beachhead in the tech industry. But for me, someone has the family history, has been involved in politics, involved in the labor movement. I kept finding myself thinking back to this period, sometimes nostalgically, sometimes wishing we were back in one of these kind of huge upsurges of working class politics. And when we see the kind of green shoots of the success of the UAW, the success of rank and file reformers, the success of organizing service worker shops, I wanted to say, what was it like the last time we were in one of these moments? What were some of the strategic dilemmas that confronted organizers then? How is that different from the moment we're in now? And I realized I needed to be a more serious student of this history and of this moment. And, the organizing committee, it's a big crew, but it's really smart people. And they've been a great guide to kind of get back into this earlier moment when so much seemed possible and on the table for the labor movement.
What about you, Tim?
Yeah, so I also come from a union family, at least as much as that's possible, growing up in Central Florida where there aren't a lot of unions. But I spent a lot of time growing up with my mom's parents who are from New York and had been part of the East Coast Longshore Union and the Teachers Union, respectively. Interestingly, neither one of those is a CIO union, but I really got a sense, really from my grandparents, of just the whole overall what we're calling the age of the CIO, right? Something that didn't just limit itself to people who belonged to one of these unions, but was a whole, thing with demonstrations and concerts and, night school type things. And I think largely through spending so much time with my grandparents, I ended up becoming a historian. I went to graduate school for history, where I also became part of organizing UAW local at my graduate school, actually with a comrade named Brandon Mancilla, who I think you guys might have heard of on here.
Sounds familiar.
And so my approach to the podcast is sort of coming out of academic history and wanting to share this history with a much bigger audience, because whenever I've had the chance to talk about this or teach this in a labor school, I find that people are really hungry to learn about this, to talk about it, to connect their experiences with what historians have to say. So I see the podcast as a way of trying to sort of bridge these different audiences.
And so what I'm hearing basically, and you're wanting to kind of analyze the lessons of the CIO period and what we can learn today. And so basically, if all union members listened to your podcast, we would be able to replicate and do more than what the CIO did, because we'll have learned the lessons and be able to learn from the mistakes. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah, I mean, that's the hope. There's, it's hard to replicate that moment. There's so much which is different now than then. And there's so much which is out of our hands in the labor movement too. We could be rank and file members. I'm sure many of your listeners are. We might be leading our locals, but we do not control the purse strings of some of the larger unions. And it's, one of the striking things about the CIO is that it combined both mass rank and file initiative along with a hell of a lot of financial resources committed towards, organizing the unorganized. And that second bit is one thing we're probably not going to get to the bottom of or be able to control here from this radio show.
Right. Well, that's why everybody, that includes the leaders, they've got to listen to the podcast too. And then, once we get all of the union presidents on board, then that's when we're going to be able to, all the presidents and all the members, and then we'll be able to do it again. So, let's just give us a super, kind of 30,000 foot overview of the CIO, and why that's important. Why is that a period that we should, as union members, be interested in learning about and learning the lessons of, and the mistakes from that period and that movement and that organization. So just the kind of 30,000 foot overview of the CIO and the age of the CIO and why we should be interested in that.
Tim, do you want me to start, or do you want to? You
go ahead, Ben, and I'll jump in if I have something to add.
So, I mean, the big thing to think about is that, the CIO starts in 1935, but this idea of the industrial union, of bringing together all of the workers in one workplace or industry, regardless of your skill, regardless of the particular job you might do, but also without exclusions along the lines of race or gender or immigration status or religion, which was actually a big one in the earlier history of the American working class. This was a kind of torch that was carried for many decades throughout the workers' movement, often especially kind of lit up after moments when earlier strikes or struggles were defeated. So many strikes in railroads, in mining, in textile, they were often cut off or found themselves limited because they were only working from a smaller subsection of organizers. You might have people that had a particular skill or craft in a much larger corporate structure, but they would have their own separate organizations. And this inability to kind of build a movement which worked across those existing segregations and divisions lit up the idea and made people quite attracted to the idea of an industrial organization. People talked about it almost as much, perhaps even more, than they talked about the need to build their own independent labor party. So different groups over the kind of years leading up to the 1930s, like the international workers of the industrial workers of the world, the mine workers, they all kind of try these experiments to organize people on industrial lines, but it's not really until the 1930s where that breaks out. And so you start, one of the important parts of this moment is you see a range of, out of the Great Depression, a range of really confident, strident, working class kind of strikes in textiles, in auto, in Teamsters and trucking, on the amongst sailors and longshoremen, and they put this idea of industrial organization back on the agenda. By the time the CIO comes around in 1935, they give that a durable organizational and institutional structure, and go on to kind of make conquests in steel, in auto, and a range of other industries, including white-collar workplaces, culture workers, and Hollywood. And what's striking about the CIO from, like the kind of 10,000-foot view is what it accomplishes for its members. Its success was partial. That's one of the things we want to talk about. It's not a story of only unalloyed victory. It's a story just as often of defeat and the kind of limits and brakes that were put on working class politics and organization. But they achieved quite a bit in terms of economic security for their members, in terms of dignity on the job. They conquered and defeated undemocratic company towns. They breathed new civic and democratic life in a lot of parts of America that previously hadn't seen it. And it also put on the agenda an idea of real egalitarianism amongst workers. American workers have long been divided along, again, axes of race, of immigration, of religion, of geography and sector, around gender. And the CIO, its standout through at least most of and the most important moments of its history is one of unity and one of kind of a shared, it really did bring into American political life a range of different groups that were previously excluded from it. I don't know if Tim, if there's anything else you want to
Yeah, I mean, that's all really amazing. I think, you can sort of underline a lot of that by trying to think about it, what the CIO meant from the perspective of capitalists and business and the state. And so the situation there is, in 1929, it's not that there are no unions. In fact, actually, like private sector union density is probably a little higher than it was now. But it's really in construction, it's in the railway brotherhoods. The most important industries in the country from the perspective of business, like steel, auto, rubber, these are completely union-free places. You can't work in these industries if you belong to a union. And that's not just a sort of natural condition. That's something that's been, built assiduously by employers in the state over a course of decades. And then within the course of less than a decade, that all changes. And the CIO sort of astonishingly quickly has organized almost all of these central industries, right? By the time World War II comes around, they've organized, the entire steel industry, the entire auto industry, and most of the rest of the mass production industries that are at the center of the American economy at this time. And so that happening so quickly gives them I mean the leaders of the CIO, but also the workers in the CIO who are workplace activists, but also voters. It gives them a real sense of power and a reality of power at a moment during the Great Depression when a lot of the basic coordinates of American politics and society are up for grabs, right? Everyone knows the system isn't working in the 1930s. The only question is how it's going to be put back together. And at that moment of crisis, working people come to have a real sense of their capacity, both in the workplace and in politics, which lets them at least have a voice in the agenda, for a period. I think we're going to end the show around 1955, by which time I think you could say a lot of that potential was had spent itself. But, from 1930 to 1955 is a long time for workers to really have a voice in setting the agenda of the whole country.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, absolutely. Because it's a lot different from today. I think that just in the last 2 or 3 years, we're seeing a situation where unions are, being considered in sort of political decisions as they're being made, but certainly not anything like the power that they had during the CIO period. And one of the big asterisks around the CIO's success in organizing these major industries and the American economy and having so much power is the South. And there was a big push to try to remedy that, to try to kind of maybe fulfill the promise of the CIO by organizing the South through Operation Dixie. That I can't remember where I saw this, but the popular imagination is of Operation Dixie as a huge kind of last-ditch gambit to organize the South with a lot of resources behind it and a lot of interest in it. But that actually, if you analyze the expenditures of Operation Dixie compared to other attempts by other unions to organize Southern industries, it was smaller and really just kind of marked the end of concerted attempts to organize in the South, really. And so that's kind of an interesting thing. But obviously, the fact remains that the South was largely unorganized. And so I'm interested, and y'all haven't gotten to talking about Operation Dixie yet in your podcast, but I'm interested in your thoughts on the failure of the labor movement to, in a big way, organize the South. And Tim, we can start with you for this one.
Yeah, sure. So Operation Dixie is definitely crucial, and maybe we can sort of work our way back to it. But one thing we really, I think, have learned in preparing for the show and I'm trying to share with our audience is that, the history of the CIO and the South starts earlier. It actually starts, at the very beginning before the CIO. So even, really at the very beginning, 1929, there are these major strikes in the textile plants in the Piedmont in North Carolina. The famous struggle at Gastonia that we talk about a little bit. Then, of course, in the coal industry, things really start kicking off in the early 30s when things are really, really bad there. And that includes, Alabama, which has a history of industrial organization in mine and steel mills, too. And then there's also an attempt in 1934 to have a general strike in the textile sector. And what's really interesting is this is actually our most recent episode, which people can listen to, is all about these big strikes in 1934. And there are strikes in San Francisco, in Toledo, in Minneapolis. But the biggest strike in terms of numbers is this textile strike, which is across the country, including the South. But unlike a lot of those other strikes in Western and Northern cities, the textile strike in the South is completely crushed. And that's an example of how, long before Operation Dixie, back in 1934, some of these organizations were already faltering. And I think faltering for some of the same reasons that you mentioned, actually, that the resources weren't put into it. There wasn't the same, there certainly weren't the kind of rank and file or left-wing sort of mid-level tier activists that you found in other places. And a lot of the people who ended up trying to lead the organization in the South for the CIO, both in Operation Dixie and in an earlier moment in the 30s, they weren't really attuned to what it would take to win in the South, right? But there were other people within the CIO orbit who had a better idea of what that would look like. And maybe Ben can speak to those visionaries a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, just to underline 2 points you said there, Tim, the South, we need to rewrite and redraw our mental map of what working class politics looks like in this country, which often castigates the South as a kind of modern part of the labor movement. To be sure, it's less organized than the rest of the country now. That's a huge drag on our politics across the country. But the South, again, in 1934, 500,000 workers are on strike, largely in textiles, largely concentrated in the South. Some of the most explosive strikes in railroads at the end of the 19th century happening in St. Louis, Missouri. So it is, in terms of coal, in terms of steel, there's a lot of the most important episodes and battles are taking place in the southern part of this country. And I think we need to appreciate that and draw on those kind of traditions today. But, Jacob, you also had it right. Operation Dixie, I mean, it's often kind of almost used as a synonym for the idea of organizing the South. it was maybe one of the more feeble efforts in the period of really trying to make serious inroads amongst Southern workers. They only ended up spending $350,000 on Operation Dixie. It's about $5 million today. Let's put that into perspective. The UAW just pledged $40 million that they're going to spend in the next year just to reorganize auto, not organize the entire region. That money, that $350,000 that they spent, that was less than in the 1930s. They had spent exclusively to organize textiles or exclusively to organize steel in the South. So it was the last ditch effort, as you put it. That's totally correct. But it was a half-hearted effort from the jump, because Operation Dixie, unlike the most successful drives we see throughout the 1930s and 40s, kind of relied on a strategy. There was maybe like 2 or 3 big mistakes we can talk about. The first one is its decision about where to concentrate. At first, it decided to concentrate not in the big cities where there were the heavy industries, which had a lot of structural power and also had a lot of movement organizations around them, what we might call the associational power of being able to call on your allies for boycotts, supporting the picket line, supporting you when you're on strike to help put the brakes on the possibility of repression. They instead concentrated on the large textile mills. The large textile mills were often isolated from the big cities. They had less allies that they could call on. And textiles, what's kind of tricky about them is that they don't have the same kind of structural power that you have in a steel mill, in an auto factory. And why is that? Well, when you're in a textile mill, you're often operating one machine, producing one garment at a time. And so if 3 or 4 of you go on strike, 3 or 4 machines aren't operating, but the rest of the mill is. What's striking about the sit-downs or the strikes that occur in heavy industries in a lot of cases is that you could have a small group of people in an organizing committee really produce a chokehold that could shut down not just your plant, but many of the other plants all arrayed along the value chain of producing a particular commodity. So small minorities could exercise tremendous structural power there. That really just wasn't true in textile. When textile workers are often most successful at organizing, they're all around the world. Whether they're talking about Korea or Russia, in Western Europe, the United States, it's when they're located in cities where they have those allies they can count on that they're most successful. So the South, they focused on maybe the wrong mills. Why did they focus on textile mills? Well, they wanted to avoid the question of race. The textile mills were traditionally overwhelmingly white workers. They were in these more isolated towns, right? They weren't in some of the larger cities. And they thought, okay, we can avoid some of the trickier questions about the legacy and afterlife of slavery if we focus on some of these whiter mills. It wasn't successful because race, even in these small white towns, was invoked to break the union organizing drives. It was the anti-Semitism ran rampant in terms of attacking CIO organizers. They even used that in the case when there were Jewish mill owners. They still used anti-Semitic attacks to try to demonize the CIO or demonize the kind of interracial alliances that characterized it at its most successful moments. There's a couple other things worth mentioning is that, in addition to the structural power, associational power, the absence of anti-racism, there was a lot of women that worked in the mills. In some cases, much as 45% of the workforce was women. But they hired virtually no women organizers. It was largely exclusively men, even though women were the natural leaders oftentimes on the shop floor of these places. And instead, the CIO tried to adopt a strategy that said, we're going to cozy up to Dixiecrat political bosses. We are going to try to assuage the mill owners that it's not that big. Unionization won't be that big of a threat. And they came out against civil rights bills. They came out against progressive legislation. They spoke out against the anti-lynching bill that was traveling through Congress in 46 and 47.
I mean, at one point in Birmingham, they even, the sort of right wing of the CIO is willing to work with the Ku Klux Klan against rivals, especially communists within the Steelworkers Union.
That's right. In South Carolina, they tell their members who are planning to organize against a Klan rally in South Carolina, they demobilize them, tell them go home, don't do that. And so they develop a reputation of, again, being a kind of run-of-the-mill Dixiecrat kind of political outfit, which doesn't gain favor amongst the politicians anyway, but certainly then the workers who are looking for a real alternative don't find one in Operation Dixie either.
So I am, trying. I think maybe kind of similar to y'all in a much smaller way, but similar to y'all in before you started on this podcast, being interested in and thinking that this knowledge is important and you want to understand it. And so I have been recently trying to do some of this reading myself. I haven't read much about Operation Dixie yet. I have just started reading The Southern Key, and already I'm seeing a lot of kind of similarities in some of the arguments that you're making, and you've gone maybe further into this area than I've gotten yet. But that is fascinating that not only did Operation Dixie, there was a rhetorical kind of sidestepping of the race question, which that's one thing to do that. And I say that interestingly enough because we just talked to Dan Letwin, author of Alabama Coal Miners, The Challenge of Interracial Unionism. And that is actually what the UMW did in the late 19th and early 20th century. They kind of, rhetorically sidestepped the race question. They were not, they weren't going out and doing a lot of the pro kind of integration, social equality stuff. But strategically, they were very much obviously, an interracial union insofar as you could be in times like 1901 in Alabama when the Constitution was being rewritten to disenfranchise black people. They still had black members and black leaders elected presidents, right? And so, that's a huge difference between what the UMW was doing. And this is, 1898, 1901, 1906. The UMW was doing, sure, they weren't perfect, right? They you wouldn't be able to talk to somebody from the UMW at that time today and think they've got great, perfect politics. But it's a lot different to kind of rhetorically sidestep the question while strategically and tactically and in actuality being pretty interracial and pretty egalitarian. It's a whole different thing to strategically target places where you think that, we're not going to have to deal with this a lot. And then when you do have to deal with it, siding with the Ku Klux Klan. Right. That is wild.
It's baffling. It doesn't work, right? It's a strategy which makes what should be your most natural constituency in vanguard. When they polled workers, black workers, white workers across the South about their feelings of the CIO, I think it was 70-something% of white workers were in favor. 90% of black workers wanted to join a union. And yet Operation Dixie fails to attract them to the campaigns that they're organizing, most often because they are sending out all of the opposite political signals that you would want to send out, that your issues and your concerns, attacking the Jim Crow order, is not at all part of what the union is about. We're only narrowly going to talk about a couple of issues around wages, and maybe not even that. This is a long-standing problem for workers across the South, of leaders which want to avoid the race question, but also leaders which don't take the issues of textile workers seriously. Even when you have 500,000 largely white workers going on strike in 34 or right in the eve of the Great Depression or start of the Great Depression, one of the main things they want to talk about is called the stretch out, the speed up, the rate at which they have to crank out a lot of these goods. But that is an issue that oftentimes the main cast of bureaucrats in the AFL don't want to touch at all with the 10-foot pole, and they want to narrowly concern issues around union recognition and around wage increases. And that's doubly true of issues around race and discrimination, and also gender and discrimination, gender harassment, which is rampant often, especially in these kind of mill towns. What's interesting, and I want to pass to Tim in a second, is that there are other routes that people took throughout the South. I mean, again, when radicals are kind of organizing some of the textile strikes in the early 20s after the AFL abandons it entirely and radicals have to step into the breach, they don't hide their politics. They say pretty openly about what they're about, what they think about capitalism. They also, even when it's a largely and overwhelmingly white workforce, champion the idea of interracial unity. And that is something a lot of the leaders in the Gastonia strikes or the Piedmont strikes take place in the early 20s. They become outstanding advocates for civil rights in the years ahead, which shows, I think, there's another path worth taking. It's not as if people's ideas about this can often be plastic, and they can be shown that unity can be the basis of advancing their own interests, that people can be won over to egalitarian ideas if you're willing to organize for them. I think it's one of the lessons of this story, and unfortunately not a lesson that the CIO leadership by the 1940s is really heeding.
Right. Right. I'll pass it back to Tim in just a second. But just for it's absolutely racist. Like Adam put in our notes document that race is still an issue in the South. Absolutely. And just for for what it's worth, a little bit of lore from the Valley Labor Report. David, the guy that I started the program with, his grandmother was actually my recollection of his recollection, right? So now we're twice removed, but was that his grandmother was president of the local in Huntsville when they went on strike during the textile strike, and he's always kind of regretted not asking her more about that because that would be kind of a fascinating thing. And so I'm not totally sure that she was the president as opposed to maybe a member or a leader, but I think that's my recollection of his recollection the last time we talked about that.
Well, there's a book about this called "We Were All Leaders," right? So maybe she was.
There you go.
I love that. Yeah, and I just wanted to jump in before we let you have the final word there, Tim, that what y'all were describing is so relevant today into our movement and the issues that we're grappling with, even though there are so many differences in terms of conditions, like you described earlier. But these questions of race and what is a union issue and where does the union step out and lead versus follow, those are all questions we have to grapple with today, and it's questions that our union leaders aren't always doing a great job with, just like they didn't then. And I think some of the aftermath of Operation Dixie and things like that, we still deal with, right? There's still, a bad taste in people's mouth in some instances, right? Where some folks in the Black community remember unions as being, racist institutions, just for lack of a better word, right? I mean, that's out there. And, some of that history is still impacting organizing today, right? And so it's not just the questions, but like also the aftermath there. But I wanted to let you jump back in, Tim, but that just really stuck with me.
Said.
Yeah, maybe just a last thought. As listen to all you guys talk, I want to say that it's not just in the South that Southerners are engaging in the CIO, right? There's also a huge migration during the Second World War of both white and Black Southerners into factories in the North and the West. And there's some of the same problems we're talking about with Operation Dixie actually happening there, right? Where by the time World War II comes around, the top CIO bureaucrats have a very kind of technocratic, anti-democratic view of the unions, so that even when some of these Southerners end up enrolled in unions because they're working in war plants, they still don't really feel like the unions belong to them or are theirs, right? And that can be true whether you're a white Appalachian or a Black Southerner working in a UAW plant where there are no Black shop stewards. And so, that's just a way of saying that in the end, the question of the South and the CIO is not a Southern question. It becomes a national question. And as you said quite well, one we're still living with today.
Right. Well, and that's here's another lore thing. We've got a High Thurman was a Southerner that moved to Chicago and was part of the Rainbow Coalition. This is obviously a separate period, but that dynamic of Southerners kind of being everywhere, because of the migration is key in multiple periods and for multiple reasons. And so with, talking about Operation Dixie and the 1934 strikes, including the textile strike, is, there are different periods, but there's a lot of interplay there. And so the most recent episode was about the 1934 strikes. And so talk to us about the dynamics of the strikes in 34, what made them unique, and what were the possibilities there that were not fully realized, and what were the implications of the realization or lack thereof for the age of the CIO and for, labor in the South.
The strikes in 34, they're some of the most heroic strikes you can imagine. Someone, a historian who wrote a great book, Workers on the Waterfront, said they almost seem like they're coming out of like an old proletarian novel from the 1930s, except their truth sometimes can be a little bit stranger than fiction. These were this is before the CIO, mind you, right? A year before the CIO actually gets its own institutional legs. So these are largely happening within kind of conservative craft unions in the AFL. But workers kind of take hold of what organizational resources they can find and produce like real general strikes that rock a number of kind of mid-sized industrial cities across the country and send a kind of green light to workers all over the United States that now is the time to be on the move. So we talk about 3 of them in these years. There's the Teamsters strike in Minneapolis. There is the Autolite strike in Toledo, Ohio. And then there's the West Coast waterfront strike, particularly concentrated in San Francisco. And there's maybe a couple of unique features to these strikes that are worth mentioning. First is that they often involve small groups of radical workers, at the time members of the Communist Party, members of the Trotskyist movement, members of other kind of dissident left-wing kind of offshoots that provide a kind of vantage point and alternative organizational infrastructure to popularize the idea of big transformative demands and provide an organizational infrastructure when the existing union leadership wants to pull the brakes on the strike. So that's one important feature you see across all of these strikes, this fascinating interaction between small groups of radicals and a much larger mass movement of workers, where the small groups of radicals can be a tribune for, can provide some direction to, but also provide the space for working class leadership to kind of emerge in the course of these fights. I think the other striking thing about 1934 is the kind of demands that they fought over. They were oftentimes fighting for union recognition. They were fighting for increased wages. In a place like San Francisco and the West Coast waterfront, they were also fighting for substantive transformations in the way that work felt, and the way that people experienced work. They were fighting for the hiring hall. One of the big ways that sailors and longshoremen were disciplined was by kind of, the capacious control of a single kind of manager guy on the docks to decide whether or not you'd be hired for a job that day. You'd show up to work every Monday and you had no idea whether or not you'd be selected to the job. People were often kicking back upwards of 10, 20% of their wages in order to make sure that they were going to be hired. And so workers made, the small group of radicals helped popularize the demand that we should control the hiring hall. Unions and workers should determine in what fashion we distribute jobs so it happens on an equal playing field, so that we don't have to be subject to speed ups from the bosses. Right. And we can kind of have some control over work. And so those demands also, I think, are really important. Demands also about who controls the work process, and are you willing to kind of pursue those demands even outside the scope of a normal contract? Tim, I don't know if you have more you want to add there.
There's a lot, and Ben and the other co-hosts do a great job on that episode. I think another really interesting new innovation that they did in some of these strikes was to try to bring in the unemployed, right? Because if you think about trying to organize a union in the Depression is hard for a lot of reasons, in part because there's lots of people lined up outside without jobs who would like to have jobs. And up to this point, union leaders had basically treated the unemployed as, an enemy, a threat, a dangerous class. But in a lot of these places like Minneapolis and Toledo, through some of this organizing that happened earlier in the Depression when the bottom was really falling out, there were these unemployed councils and organizations of the unemployed. And the way that comes together in some of these strikes, it just shows you the kind of creativity that can come out of crazy moments like this. When there's a court injunction against workers picketing, they'll say, okay, we'll bring in the unemployed council to, surround the plant and actually have them help. And it's a really, I think a new and kind of like a, really brilliant stroke that shows you how some of these organizers were thinking and the difference a few people thinking along those lines could make to some of these struggles.
You mentioned...
Yeah, they're really trying to bring...
Oh, no, go ahead.
Please. I say in all these cases, they're really trying to bring in workers beyond the immediate plant. So they bring in workers, right, the unemployed workers as well, and they combine them with the other workers. And the general strikes oftentimes involve other unions supporting the strike and even backing it. And so even as their demands are often about one workplace or another, they're pushing back against repression. They're pushing back against the bringing of the National Guard into these towns. And they're trying to lay claim to a new social warrant that workers can and should be organized. And it's only through their own self-help that they're going to be able to set the agenda for the country at large. They can no longer wait for FDR or someone in DC to do it for them.
So you mentioned in there the importance of the leadership and participation of radical elements in the CIO or in then AFL unions. From in particular, I think the largest actor is the Communist Party, but there were other Trotskyist organizations that were influential in certain areas, and the participation of radicals in unions, whether they call themselves communists or socialists or anarchists or Trotskyists or whatever, has been, as I read history, an incredibly important feature of union success. When the labor movement is successful, it seems to me that there are a huge participation in the labor movement by radicals, and a lot of leadership are radicals themselves, or at least sympathetic to them, and so I'm interested. Could talk to me about your perception of the role of radicals in the age of the CIO, both the positive and the negative, because the Communist Party and Communist Party members were purged from the CIO, and I think the easy thing as people that are radicals or sympathetic to radicals today, the easy thing is to say, oh, that was a terrible decision, right? And I think probably on principle it was, but there were a lot of things that the communists did, that kind of made them lose favor with workers and made it easier for the anti-communist forces in the labor movement to expel them. So yeah, comment on that and the importance and presence of radicals in the movement writ large.
Tim, do you want to start?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I think you're exactly right. I think, almost anyone looking at this history would have to agree that radicals and, particular Communist Party members were, almost indispensable to the organizing of the CIO. I think at the same time, almost everyone would agree that there are, very serious mistakes made, and that, there were things that the Communist Party did that undermined, their own interests and those of the CIO. The way that people talk about this a lot is in terms of the changing lines in the Communist Party, right? And of course, there's nothing wrong with having different tactics and strategies at different times. It's kind of what you would want from a political organization. But some of the turns were so abrupt, I think, that they did cause people to lose faith in the Communist Party as an organization devoted to, domestic class struggle as opposed to Soviet foreign policy. Right. And so the most famous example of that is the sort of changing position on World War II. Right. There's a period when the Communist Party is very anti-fascist, then a sort of turn towards opposing U.S. entry to World War II, and then a reverse turn towards supporting the war, which is so, so fervent that then the communists, at least in the top leadership levels, become supporters of the no strike pledge. Right. And so even, from a sort of left-wing rank and file perspective, they're on the wrong side of that, leaving aside whatever you think about the Soviet Union. So I agree with all that. I think, we try to be balanced but still opinionated on the show, and I think part of that is to say that in each of these moments of different party lines, there are still interesting lessons to be learned, So I'll take an example. Like, it's very easy, I think, to think that the Soviet Union was, or the U.S. Communist Party was wrong, or it was not helpful for them to take this position of opposing U.S. entry into World War II. But they actually organized a lot of really important strikes during that period, which initially were thought of in a kind of conspiratorial way. They're organizing the aviation industry because they want to cripple the war effort. But as historians have really looked at that, they say that no, actually, aircraft workers were like really being underpaid and needed a union. And so maybe, if not always, for the right reasons, there's something to learn from all of these periods. Even though I think, as I would agree with you, that the Communist Party did itself no favors in many cases and did make it easier for its enemies to come in for the kill after the war.
We could talk about this for hours, and I guess thankfully we will on the podcast. But I think that Tim nailed the basic dynamics. I think that it's worth thinking about, why were radicals so important? Well, a couple of reasons. One is that you needed people to be quite dedicated. These were often deadly missions organizing these plants and drives. Violence was endemic to efforts to respond to the labor movement all across the country. We talk about the South earlier, but California was the ACLU's most dangerous state by the start of 1934 in terms of the severity of labor repression. And that was after a number of immigrant workers were kind of really attacked and terrorized all across the kind of California, the valleys of California's agricultural industry. Radicals could provide a kind of element of determination, of a willingness to kind of go into these relatively dangerous situations. They often had pulled together resources like newspapers. Again, in the waterfront strike, it was an old communist newspaper, the Waterfront Worker, that ended up being the organ through which workers communicated with each other about their need for steadfastness, around the need for the demand around the hiring hall, about the importance of organizing along industrial rather than narrow craft lines. So these radical groups provided determination, they provided an infrastructure, but they also provided an idea that workers should have kind of unfettered power over the shape of their working days. And those that kind of idea often translated into ambitious demands, more ambitious demands than the labor movement can sometimes throw up. They could anticipate, something Alex Press talks about in her episode of 1934 when talking about the Dune brothers, these group of four Trotskyist brothers that helped lead a strike in Minneapolis. It's like it's the Iron Claw, but the 1930s version. It's pretty incredible. But they knew and helped inoculate workers against the almost certain reality of state repression that was going to come in the course of the strike. Repression often devastates strikes. The radicals could tell you, okay, we're steeled for this, we're prepared for this, and we know how we can fight back against it. And even that kind of work of inoculation could often make quite a big difference.
Well, I think that's great. All really important stuff. Really appreciate your time, Tim and Ben. The podcast is called Fragile Juggernaut. It is an original by Haymarket Books, the first, I think, original limited run podcast series. I guess we can close with Fragile Juggernaut. I think maybe the name makes intuitive sense, but why did you call it that?
It's the name of an opening chapter. There's not a lot of great books that tell the whole story of the CIO. One of the few efforts at putting one is together by a historian by the name of Zieger, and he opens his intro, he titles it Fragile Juggernaut, which is the idea that there was this massive working class there's this massive moment when workers joined into their own organizations and were a juggernaut that reshaped American political life and the economy more in their image, more in their interest. But it was a fragile one that fell apart relatively soon after its kind of origins. So it's like, we don't totally agree with all of the lines that Zieger has, but what I think we want to capture is that this is a moment when labor exercises almost unprecedented amounts of power and demonstrates real possibility of other directions our society might have taken. But the basis of that unity was a fragile one. And the base of the power workers were able to organize was pretty precarious. Tim, I don't know if you want to add anything to that.
Yeah, and just to say, I think one reason we like the kind of contradictory image of Fragile Juggernaut is I think, it's very common to think, okay, there was a time in the past when labor was strong, and then there's now when labor is weak. Yeah. And we can all see the logic to that and the reasons one might think that. But actually things aren't that simple. And even in the time, in the past, what we think of as a golden age, there were, many of the same problems, also some different problems, that we face than the ones we face today. And so I think, in a way, there's a kind of optimism for the present in pointing out the fragility of the past, which is that, these great accomplishments came out of a period when things were not easy by any stretch of the imagination.
Right.
I love that. Great way to wrap it up for sure. Really appreciate you guys, and I encourage folks to check out the podcast. It is definitely worth your listen.
Yeah, absolutely.
I really appreciate you both. Thanks for all the time and all the
thank
work
you
you're
guys
doing.
so much. Great to be here.
Yeah, absolutely. Y'all take care, brothers.
Take care.
Yeah.
Looking forward to listening to that latest episode and continuing to listen as they go on. You should too. Fragile Juggernaut, wherever you get your podcasts. So like we do with Last Week in Southern Labor, we like to take a look at what bosses were up to in the U.S. South and the American colonies. We weren't able to get to it in the main show, so we're going to get to it here. First up, in Alabama, a 38-year-old worker at a Coleman manufacturing plant suffered fatal injuries after getting caught inside a molding machine. A fatality the employer could have prevented by following established safety rules, the U.S. Department of Labor found after a workplace safety investigation. The department's Occupational Safety and Health Administration found that on August 31st, 2023, the Coleman Casting Corporation second shift production supervisor attempted to adjust a plastic film on a mold machine meant to produce forklift counterweights when the machine cycled, pinning the worker between the moving components inside. OSHA investigators determined that the employer repeatedly exposed workers to safety hazards by failing to de-energize and lock out the automated molding machine while workers were performing maintenance and cleaning. Investigators found the company exposed workers to caught-in hazards by failing to do the following: develop and utilize written lockout-tagout procedures, conduct periodic inspections of lockout-tagout procedures, ensure that employees are trained on lockout-tagout procedures, ensure that employees are placing locks when conducting lockout-tagout procedures, and ensuring machine guarding was in place for employees working in the pit. OSHA cited the employer with 6 serious violations and proposed $95,000 in penalties. The company has 15 business days to comply, request an informal conference, or contest the findings. In Georgia, the U.S. Department of Labor has filed a federal court complaint against a Lawrenceville pesticide and agricultural chemical manufacturer after the company allegedly terminated a worker's employment in retaliation for filing a safety and health complaint with the department. Filed in the U.S. District Court for the Northern District of Georgia, the complaint proposes Avenger Products, LLC, and its parent company, Kittredge Corporation, pay the former customer service manager back pay, compensatory and punitive damages to address lost wages and other financial losses and emotional distress related to their termination, and forbids the company from future retaliation permanently. OSHA alleges that Avenger Products violated the Occupational Safety and Health Act by ending the workers' employment because they exercised their rights protected under the Act. A whistleblower investigation by the department's Occupational Safety and Health Administration found that the employer terminated the employee after they made complaints about safety hazards associated with chemical exposures in the workplace. Avenger Products LLC's history with OSHA includes a total of 40 citations and over $250,000 in proposed penalties from June 2018 to December 2019. In Texas, a Houston area contractor's willful disregard for required safety procedures contributed to an 18-year-old worker fatality when a 15-foot trench wall collapsed on him near Fulshear in September 2023. A federal investigation found investigators with the U.S. Department of Labor's Occupational Safety and Health Administration determined that Hurtado Construction Corporation allowed the teenager to work in the excavation without a proper protective system in place to prevent its collapse. The young worker suffered fatal injuries when the trench wall caved in, and tons of dirt pinned him against a reinforced concrete box. In November 2021, OSHA cited the company for failing to use an adequate protective system to safeguard employees from a potentially deadly collapse at another excavation site in Katy, continuing a history of workplace safety failures that include 8 OSHA citations for not providing required protective systems after another worker fatality in January 2007. OSHA issued the company 1 willful citation for allowing workers to work in a trench without adequate protections. The agency also issued 5 serious citations for Hurtado's failure to do the following: have someone available to render first aid at the Fulshear site, providing a ladder for a quick escape, making employees work in an excavation saturated with water, and improperly using a reinforced concrete box as a protective system during excavation work. Hurtado Construction Company faces $250,000 in proposed penalties for its violations. Headquartered in Richmond, Hurtado Construction provides water, sewer, and storm water line installations and repair. Workplace deaths related to excavation and trenching operations have risen significantly from 15 worker fatalities in 2021 to 40 worker fatalities in 2022. That's a near threefold increase. Several dishonorable mentions this week. In 2022, OSHA cited Dean Sausage in Atala, Alabama, $37,000 for 14 violations around amputation hazards. In a follow-up investigation this year, similar hazards were found, including hazards related to lockout, tagout, machine guarding, and blocked exits. OSHA is proposing an additional $116,000 in penalties. U.S. Department of Labor investigations at 4 Northern Virginia Jersey Mike's franchise locations have found the operator allowed more than a dozen employees under the age of 16 to perform dangerous tasks and work longer than permitted in violation of federal child labor regulations. J.M. Burke, the operator of the franchises, paid $108,000 in civil money penalties to resolve its child labor infractions. C&M Roustabout Services LLC in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma, has been cited $103,000 by OSHA for failing federal safety procedures that left a 30-year-old worker suffering fatal asphyxiation as they tried to make repairs inside a water tank at a McLean County well site in September 2023. Dillard's in Atlanta, Georgia, will pay $70,000 and furnish other relief to settle a U.S. Equal Employment Opportunity Commission retaliation lawsuit after refusing reasonable accommodations for a pregnant worker. Nursing home operators Hobie Sound, OPCO, and related companies Hobe Sound Realty, TOH Holdings, and HSRE have agreed to pay $67,500 to settle a national origin discrimination lawsuit filed by the U.S. Equal Employment Opportunity Commission after they allegedly revoked a job offer for a Haitian immigrant while making discriminatory remarks about, quote, Haitian voodoo. Pharmacy and retailer Walgreens Company has agreed to pay $205,000 and provide other relief to settle a pregnancy discrimination lawsuit filed by the U.S. Equal Employment Opportunity Commission after refusing to allow a pregnant worker to take emergency medical leave. And that is it for Boss Watch. If you want to get Boss Watch and Last Week in Southern Labor as a newsletter, you can subscribe to the newsletter, tvlr.fm, or fill out a contact form, tvlr.fm/contact, and you'll get a written version of that segment in your inbox every single week. And if you're already getting it, you can forward it to your friends, forward it to your union members, all of that kind of stuff. Would love to increase the circulation. We've got another bill coming out of Montgomery that we wanted to make sure that we talk about this week. But first, I wanted to let you know some good news. The Environmental Protection Agency finalized a rule, a risk management rule for chrysotile asbestos. The rule prohibits ongoing uses of the only known form of asbestos currently imported, processed, and distributed in the United States, and will protect people from lung cancer, mesothelioma, ovarian cancer, laryngeal cancer, and other health problems caused by asbestos exposure. These detrimental effects have been known about asbestos for decades, but bosses put profit above workers' health all the time, and they do now with continued asbestos production in the United States, as well as continued asbestos exposure in older homes and schools. That's one of the things that advocates are mentioning about how this law doesn't go far enough because it does not address legacy uses of the mineral. It doesn't do anything to safeguard the public from asbestos building products in older homes and schools, as I mentioned. But it's a step in the right direction, right? We've been moving in this direction regarding asbestos for decades. We've been moving towards, more bans of the product, increased worker protection, increased accountability for employers who utilize asbestos and expose their employees to these dangers needlessly. Right, that's kind of the direction that we've been going, and that direction is continuing with, it's worth noting, a Democratic administration. And, that doesn't mean anything other than, just to note that as a fact, right? It's important to know the facts, and that's a fact. Meanwhile, in Alabama, from a Republican legislator, it remains to be seen if this is going to be passed. Hopefully it doesn't. I don't, certainly there's not a constituency for this proposed bill, but at least a broad constituency. There's a constituency in the employers who want to expose their workers to asbestos and be protected from accountability. That's the constituency for this bill, but it's not a very broad one. But this bill would make it more difficult for people exposed to asbestos to make claims against the people who expose them, particularly in a workplace environment. Appreciate Tara Bailey for hitting us up on this, because I haven't seen any news coverage about this at all. Have you, Adam?
No, I haven't. I have not.
Yeah, it's pretty wild that I haven't seen anything about that. AL.com, Alabama Political Reporter, I haven't seen anything at all about this piece of legislation, but it is incredibly draconian. And here it is. I'm just going to read the synopsis. So this was written by the guy who wrote the bill, right? This is like he wrote this, and then he finished writing it, and he was like, hell yeah, that's good. I like that. That's what I want to do with my time in Montgomery. Here it is. Under existing law, the plaintiff in an action for damages from asbestos exposure is required to provide the defendant with certain information. This bill would require a plaintiff to specify the basis for each claim against each defendant and provide additional, more detailed information relating to the asbestos exposure, including current and past work sites, and each individual who is knowledgeable regarding the exposures. Each individual. And if you actually read the bill, you have to include their name, phone number, and home address of each individual who's knowledgeable regarding the exposures. This bill would allow a defendant in an asbestos action to be dismissed from the action if not identified as required. This bill would also stay discovery, meaning prohibit discovery, in an asbestos action until the required disclosures have been made. And so discovery is an incredibly important process by which you can discover things about the person's state of mind in a case, right? Or, some of the, whether or not they knew what they were exposing people to, right? And so this is making it more difficult, making the process more onerous to make claims for asbestos exposure, and making it more difficult to find things from the employer. I mean, it's just just the long and short of it is it makes it more difficult for people exposed to asbestos to hold the exposer accountable. So moving in exactly the opposite direction of the federal government. And so, look, that's worth knowing. That's a thing that's worth knowing. And it's, incredibly draconian. And it's premised on the assumption that it's just way too easy for people to make asbestos claims against asbestos exposers. And, look, I'm not an asbestos law expert. Okay, so, that caveat out there. I've just got an extremely difficult time buying that argument, right? I've got an extremely difficult time buying the argument that it's just super easy for people to make a claim against somebody that they exposed me to asbestos and I suffered damages that you need to compensate me for, right?
Right.
I mean, that's just, look, if he wants to come on the program and explain to us how it's just super easy, and right now, actually under current law, you could do it without any justification at all, and it's just and people are paying out hundreds of thousands and millions of dollars in cases where they're not guilty, obviously, then, look, he can come on and make the case. TVLR.fm/contact. Okay?
Representative Troy Stubbs.
Send us an email. Send us an email. TVLR.fm/contact. And look, you can come on and make that case. But that's just difficult for me to buy. I have reached out to a workplace attorney about this, waiting to hear back, but I will report next week on what I hear from him. And, look, I mean, maybe he'll agree, but I just have a hard time believing that he will. But there you go. State Representative Troy Stubbs, HB 91. HB 91, Speaker of the House. Who is
Nathaniel Ledbetter?
Nathaniel Ledbetter. The phone number is 334-261-0505, and request that that bill not be taken up because that's a terrible bill. Senate Pro Tem Greg Reed, his phone number is 334-261-0894.
And you wanted to call him and urge him to oppose SB 231.
Oh, that's the voluntary recognition
That's
bill.
the anti-union bill that we mentioned in the main show. We're very concerned about that. All hands on deck. So if you want to fight that, holler at me.
And if you want to call Troy Stubbs, his phone number is 334-261-0595.
He's the one sponsoring the asbestos bill. So maybe you can ask him, where's this coming from?
And it's, I know that we have some reporters that listen to us. I would be interested in an open records request on this guy's communications and who he's talking to. I would also be interested in campaign donations. Who's donating to his campaign? What are the, Have people who have donated to his campaign had to pay a bunch of money in asbestos cases? That would be something interesting to know, but I don't have the time to. Maybe I'm just going to text a couple of reporters that I know, see if they can figure that out. I don't have the time, and I don't have the know-how to figure all that out, but some people do, and maybe they will. So there you go.
Yeah. Appreciate folks keeping us posted on these bad bills. I mean, there are a lot of bad bills in the Alabama legislature right now. And I just encourage all of our folks who are listening who are in Alabama to reach out to your legislator. It's really easy to do that. It doesn't take much time. It really does make a difference. Even though, yes, there is a supermajority Republican supermajority in the legislature. But even with that, regardless of your party or how you feel about them, every year there are bad bills that get defeated, and every year there are good bills that squeak through. Mm-hmm. And that only happens through advocacy and organizing and people getting involved. And it requires you to call your legislator. It requires you to email them, to write them, send them postcards. If you send them an email, print it out and mail it to them, mail it to the State House, right? There's different things you can do. Let your neighbors and your friends and your family know and get them to do the same thing. Longtime listeners know that I, in my day job, work for Alabama Arise, and I just want to plug their action alerts because that's an easy way you can contact your legislator. Go to alarise.org, click on the action alerts, and you will find ways to contact your senator, contact your representative, contact the governor. There are different ways to do it, but it really does take more and more people just speaking up, because here's the thing. Do you want the only folks they hear from to be the wackos and the corporate lobbyists? No, right? You want them to hear from everyday people. They need to hear from union members. They need to hear from progressive allies. They need to hear from working class folks in the community who they are supposed to represent, and they're supposed to work for us, right? And we have to remind them of that. So there's a lot of concerning bills. The ones we just mentioned today, SB 231 is the anti-union bill. HB 91 is the asbestos bill. The child labor bill is still working its way through the legislature. You'll remember that removes permits for 14 and 15-year-olds in school, making it easier for 14 and 15-year-olds to go to work. There's other issues as well. Public transportation is coming up in discussion. Folks may not be aware that Alabama invests $0 in public transportation funds. That's right, 0 state dollars go to public transportation, which is wild because there's matching funds for those dollars. In some cases, up to 4-to-1 matching from the federal government, right? So there's a lot of opportunity to help poor and working class people. Unfortunately, there's just a lot of bad bills criminalizing protest, and we've already seen successful efforts to criminalize diversity and equity and inclusion and ban so-called divisive concepts. There's just been a lot happening in the Alabama legislature. It's one of the busiest that I can remember in quite some time, and one of the worst, frankly. And so Again, I can't reiterate enough, it is worth it for you to build a relationship with your legislators, reach out to them, at least make them uncomfortable. If they're going to do something stupid, at least make them uncomfortable in the process.
And, you can actually request, in-person meetings.
Yes, you can.
And a lot of them will do it because that's so rare. That they will actually do it, especially if you hound them about it enough.
Yeah, and bring your spouse, bring a couple folks from church, a couple folks from the union, right? Have a small group meeting with the legislator. That's possible. Participate in lobby days, and anytime you can go down to Montgomery. I'll plug the Arise lobby days, April 2nd. The AFL-CIO Roadkill Barbecue in Montgomery is April 3rd. That's 2 days back-to-back where you have a chance to interact with lawmakers in Montgomery, advocate for working people. So if you can make it there, do that. But if not, if you can't make it to Montgomery, that's understandable. We need your help with emails and phone calls and getting your neighbors activated and getting them involved. It really makes a big, big difference. I talked to a former legislator this week who told me, Adam, if I got 4 unique phone calls about a bill, I knew something was up. And I needed to, really take a look at it. And so 4 phone calls, right? And I'm not saying that's always going to win.
Right.
But damn it, we have to try. We do have to try. I had someone being very dismissive to me this week about this sort of thing, saying, oh, well, this is what you get. This is who the people voted for. And it's like, okay, are we supposed to just sit down for 4 years and take anything they push at us? No, right. Absolutely not. No, you speak up for what's right. And sometimes we can move legislators to do the right thing some of the time, right, on certain issues, right? Maybe not all of them, even if it's 1 bill out of 100 that you get your representative to do the right thing. Hey, that's something. It's better than what we had, right? And that is the uphill battle that we face in Alabama, and I know it's daunting and discouraging, but it's important work. It has to be done. There are always efforts to undermine the quality of life for working people, which is already among the worst in the developed world here in Alabama. We deserve so much better. And the only way we're going to get better is when more and more working people are engaged.
Yep. That is, I think that's going to be it for us today, folks. We're right at time. Had a couple of more segments, but I didn't do just a whole lot of prep for them, so I'm good to just go ahead and wrap here. Do you unless you object, Adam?
Well, just want to wrap with a couple more plugs. Already mentioned some of those events happening in April. I also want to encourage folks to check out labornotes.org/events. There is always great training happening online. I mentioned in the main show, but on March 26th at 6 p.m. Central Time, I'm working with the North Alabama Area Labor Council to do a Unions 101 webinar. It is kind of tailored for Alabama audience, but open to any person who is interested. So wherever you're listening from, if you're interested in learning more about unions, it is a great presentation. Jennifer Shearer, who has been on the show, friend of the show, she is with the Economic Policy Institute. She does a great Unions 101 presentation, really ties in a lot of themes on worker power, justice, equity, how this all interacts with labor unions and how it's important. So looking forward to that event. We also were told by our friends at the Southern Workers Assembly that they are doing a Southern Worker School in May, on May 17th through the 19th in Charlotte, North Carolina. I unfortunately cannot make that. I have another event happening that same weekend, but for any folks out there who can make it, it sounds like a really great event. They do their best to make it affordable for folks. This is for working people, so they do their best to be accessible for working people. So especially those of you, if you've got friends in the North Carolina area, friends who can drive to Charlotte, let them know about that. You can look at Southern Workers Assembly. Also wanted to, what was my last plug is about the libraries. There's a lot of issues happening in Alabama's libraries. We didn't get time to talk about it today, but long story short, there are reactionary book banners who are out and about throughout the state trying to take over library boards, trying to defund libraries, trying to fire people, and in some cases successfully firing people. There's been a lot of controversy in Prattville with the library director being fired there, as well as several librarians. So I just encourage folks to, brush up on that and get engaged. It's an issue that impacts a whole lot of people. There are different groups that have sprung up that are doing good work around that. I know Read Freely Alabama is a grassroots group that has sprung up. DSA chapters are doing a lot of good work around that as well. So if you want to just Google Save Our Libraries Alabama, Save Our Libraries Alabama, Google that. And the first thing I get is with the Action Network page that the DSA chapters have set up. It's got updates. It tells you kind of the lay of the land, what's going on, how you can participate and help. There are changes being made to the Alabama Administrative Code. We are currently in a public comment period. So by submitting a letter during this public comment period, you can help make a difference. That's an easy way to do that. So I've sent my letter in already. I hope you will send your letter in when you get done calling those legislators for us, because we really would appreciate it. And that's all I got.
There you go. That's going to be it for us today, folks. Pre-order your hat, tvlr.fm/store.
I thought of more.
Okay.
We were on Power at Work blogcast this past week.
Dropping on Tuesday.
Really enjoyed that. We were alongside Black Work Talk, and we've had Bianca on the program before. I hadn't met Jamala before, but it was really great. Enjoyed the conversation. I was on America's Workforce Radio this past Monday. Talked about new organizing, talked about people power outreach, and talked about legislative updates in Alabama, of course. So that was really fun. And then finally was on a Lawrence County Career Tech High Schools podcast. Lawrence County, Alabama. They have a Career Tech High School, and at the Career Tech High School, they have a student-led podcast. I think that's really cool. It's a way to engage with students, for students to learn new skills. They talk about, career tech sort of stuff. And we reached out to them through the Labor Council to make connections and, build relationships with the schools and unions, because we want young people to be aware of the opportunities that that unions provide. So I got a chance to be on their podcast in Lawrence County and talk about IATSE and, kind of the life of a stagehand and the different career paths that are available to folks through IATSE specifically, but also to labor unions more broadly, and got a chance to promote the building trades and just, really good opportunity to engage with young folks. Got a couple school visits lined up for the spring. So if any of y'all listening have connections in Alabama schools and you can get us in there, we would love to do that, love to engage college or, high schools. And then also, if you are a labor person and you do this sort of outreach and work in your area, let us know. Let us know how it's going, any tips and tricks that you have, anything you found to be successful. We really believe in getting the message out to young people and engaging with students. They need to hear from labor union folks. They need to hear about the job opportunities. We need young people knowing about the building trades and signing up to be apprentices. We need young people willing to go organize workplaces. We need young people willing to go work for unions and be advocates and labor lawyers and organizers and researchers and policy analysts. We need all that. We need young talent because every day folks retire and we got to have good folks to replace them. So, yeah, that's all I got. I'll get off my soapbox there.
TVLR.fm/donate to make a donation. TVLR.fm/contact to sign up for our newsletters. And Patreon.com/The Valley Labor Report if you prefer that layout. That's going to be it for us this week, folks. See you next week.